before it was Jerusalem, before it was a temple, before it was even Israelite. It was just a hill, a steep, narrow ridge of rock, worn smooth by countless feet, wind-scoured and water-fed. A place without a name, only a rhythm, of breath, of footsteps, of time. The land was not empty, but ancient. Beneath what we now call the City of David, the bedrock holds secrets carved by those long before Solomon's voice echoed in its courtyards. The awful ridge, stone and water. Archaeologists have long puzzled over this place. A ridge stretching south from what would later become the Temple Mount. To the west lies the steep Tyropean Valley, and to the east, the Kidron Valley, its sides chiseled by flash floods and ancient graves. This narrow tongue of limestone is where Jerusalem began, not as a kingdom, not even as a city, but as a cluster of mud brick homes, small, clustered, and purposeful. Between 1800 and 1550 BCE, in the Middle Bronze Age too, this ridge bore the marks of settlement. Walled fortifications, foundations beneath foundations, steps carved into the slope. The earliest structures were laid by Canaanite peoples, perhaps the Jebusites, though the name is later. These were not invaders, but inheritors. They lived close to the water, the Gihon spring, pulsing from the earth like a slow heartbeat. This spring, emerging from a rocky cleft on the eastern side of the hill, was life itself. Without it, no settlement could survive. Stones that still whisper. The archaeological remains of this early period are fragmentary but telling. Beneath the present-day City of David Archaeological Park lies what researchers call the stepped stone structure, a massive, terrace support system of ancient retaining walls. Some believe this stepped structure once held a citadel or administrative building, perhaps even the palace of King David in later centuries. But it likely predates David, maybe by 300 years. Built in a time when Jerusalem was a Canaanite stronghold, fortified but small. Likely a highland outpost, not a center of power. And yet, it was already layered, already alive. The Gihon and the shaft. To understand Jerusalem, one must understand how people reached the water. The Gihon spring flowed year-round, a rarity in this dry hill country. But it lay exposed on a vulnerable slope. Over time, its access was hidden behind walls, guarded by towers, and eventually reached via secret passage. One such feature is the Warren Shaft, discovered in the 19th century, a vertical tunnel, carved perhaps as early as 1800 BCE, descending through solid rock to a subterranean water channel. It is believed that people, perhaps even David's soldiers later on, could descend underground, unseen, to access or protect the spring. This shaft became the stuff of biblical intrigue, 2 Samuel 5 verse 8, but its origin is purely practical, purely ancient. It was made with patience and memory. One strike at a time, one need at a time, to draw water, to survive. Even today, visitors can walk in these ancient tunnels, feet echoing through limestone, torches flickering off chisel marks nearly 4,000 years old. Silent clues in the soil. The earliest remains from this site, potsherds, foundation stones, and fragmentary walls, date back to the Middle Bronze II period. Most are Canaanite in style, showing continuity with other urban settlements in the hill country of the Levant. This was no wilderness. This was a world of small city-states, each clustered around springs, trade routes, or high ground. They built with what they had: limestone, mud brick, cedar from the north, and reeds from the Jordan Valley. Their homes were rectangular, flat-roofed, with courtyards open to the sky. Their worship was polytheistic, centered around Baal, Asherah, and other Canaanite deities. We find cultic vessels, stone masbot, standing stones, and altars tucked into private homes. The city was protected by massive stone ramparts, likely 5 meters thick, and an outer glacis, a steep slope of packed earth and stone to repel invaders. And still, it was not a capital. It was not a king's city. It was quiet, intentional, watching, waiting. Life before the kingdom. Let us slow the moment and walk through this Canaanite Jerusalem. It is dusk. A woman grinds barley at the courtyard threshold, the stone groaning softly beneath her hands. A goat shifts on the roof, tied to a wooden peg, chewing lazily. Children run barefoot over the smooth stone path, their laughter bouncing off walls that have seen siege and sacrifice. At the spring, elders murmur beneath linen shawls. A traveler arrives from Hebron, sandals dusty, bearing salt and dates wrapped in palm fiber. Life here is simple, not poor. Every act, baking, weaving, herding, is layered with memory, with ritual, not in grand temples, but in gestures, in how the bread is broken, in how the dead are buried, tucked in caves with offerings of food and oil. And far above, on the ridge, a single cedar pole waves a flag or a prayer, or both. Geopolitical crossroads. Even in this early age, Jerusalem sat between powers. To the west, the Philistines, newly arrived and establishing themselves on the coastal plains. To the north, the Hittites, Phoenicians, and the trade cities of the Levantine coast. To the east, Moab and Ammon, highland kingdoms of shifting borders. To the south, Egypt, which occasionally extended its influence up into Canaan, leaving Stelian governors in their wake. Jerusalem was not the prize, but the passage, a hill among hills, but one that would soon become central, not by might, but by meaning. Memory before myth. Much later, the Bible would speak of Jerusalem as the city of the great king. But in these early layers, there is no Solomon, no temple, no ark, only stones, only people. This is the silent world that Solomon would inherit, not from nothing, but from a long and layered past. Jerusalem was not created by kings. It was shaped by the slow press of generations, by women grinding grain, by masons laying stone, by children bathing in spring water, and by night winds carrying the scent of fig trees and sheep dung. It was not divine. It was human, and that is perhaps more sacred. The first chapter begins not with gold, nor prophecy, nor sword, but with limestone, water, and shadow. Before the name, before the kingdom, there was only a hill. And even now, if you walk the narrow stones just south of the Temple Mount, if you listen, you may still hear it breathing. The stones of Jerusalem were old, but the king who came to them was young, not in years, but in legacy. He carried no bloodline from the Highland lords. He was not born in palaces. His songs were written in the language of sheep and fields, of war and mercy. His name was David, the taking of a city. The moment David took Jerusalem, as told in 2 Samuel 5, is both sudden and quiet. And David took the stronghold of Zion. The same is the city of David. 2 Samuel 5 verse 7. But the verse is too short for what really happened. The archaeology whispers more. David came from Hebron, capital of Judah, a strong tribal center in the south. But Jerusalem, it lay at the border between Judah and the northern tribes of Israel. To unify his fragile new kingdom, David needed a neutral capital, not one dripping in tribal memory. Jerusalem was ideal, centrally located between the tribal factions, well fortified but modest, unclaimed by any single tribe, with access to fresh water and defensible terrain. He did not sack it with armies. He slipped into it, possibly through its water tunnels. A tactic scholars speculate may have involved the Warren Shaft or another access channel near the Gan Spring. Though disputed, the method reflects a city taken with strategy, not fire. A city changed by presence, not pillage. The Jebusites and the forgotten names. The city was Jebusite at the time, Canaanite in culture, perhaps with Hurrian or Amorite influences. These people were neither kings nor commoners, but guardians of a hill long tied to seasonal ritual, ancestral memory, and the gods of the land. But the Bible, as is its way, makes them footnotes. "You will not come in here," the Jebusites said. Even the blind and the lame will ward you off. They underestimated the shepherd king. But David did not destroy the Jebusites. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests they remained, integrated into the life of the new capital. Names like Araunah the Jebusite, who sells David the threshing floor, 2 Samuel 24, remind us that power changed, but people remained. Cultures do not vanish. They are absorbed, remembered in walls, accents, and the way bread is shaped in the hand. The city of David, not a palace, but a stronghold. David did not build gold-domed palaces. His Jerusalem was small, a ridgetop village with reinforced walls, stepped terraces, and perhaps wooden guard towers. Excavations south of the Temple Mount, in the City of David Archaeological Park, have revealed layers of Iron Age dwellings, narrow streets, and stone retaining walls supporting upper platforms. Many of these structures date to the 10th century BCE, David's time. There is evidence of large public buildings, some believe a palace, fortification walls from the Iron 1 to 2 transition, storage areas, workshops, and administrative quarters. But nothing grand, nothing that would suggest Solomon's later grandeur. David's Jerusalem was practical, a base, a place to govern, to pray, to plan, not to rest. A king who walked the roofs. Imagine this moment, the city newly taken. David, standing barefoot on the flat rooftop of his modest dwelling, overlooking the darkness of the valleys below. To the east, the Kidron. To the west, the shadows of the Tyropean. Above him, stars so ancient they watched the flood. Beneath him, a city not yet holy. He does not sleep easily. Too much blood has followed him. Too many eyes watch him now, tribal leaders, foreign spies, priests, scribes, women. He walks the wall, hand trailing over sun-warmed stone, remembering sheep, liars, the cracked lips of Saul. And he wonders if this hill, this stolen city, can hold a dream long enough to pass it down. The Ark and the Threshold. David's most sacred act was not military. It was religious. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. The Ark, a sacred chest said to hold the stone tablets of Moses, was moved in a ceremony filled with music, trembling, and fear, 2 Samuel 6. The story tells of a man struck dead for touching it, and of David dancing before the Lord in linen garments, unashamed. This act redefined Jerusalem not just as a political center, but as a spiritual heart. Archaeologists debate whether the Ark existed. No physical remains have been found, but ritual spaces, storage sanctuaries, and hilltop worship sites are common throughout ancient Israelite settlements. What matters more than the object is the intention. David was not building walls. He was building meaning, building for memory. Somewhere on the ridge, David built a house, likely with help from Hiram of Tyre, as later texts suggest, 2 Samuel 5 verse 11. It was not a temple. It was not even grand. But it was the beginning of a dynasty. Evidence from regional Iron Age building practices show ashlar masonry, finely cut stones, timber lintel roofing with stone slab floors, use of cedar brought from the north, simple but orderly layout, entry court, hall, sleeping quarters, inner rooms. These structures were not lavish. They were functional, defensible, and woven into the slope, hugging the contours of the hill. Somewhere beneath today's neighborhoods, the foundation stones of David's home may still sleep, not in grandeur, but in silence. Shadows in the house. Even as he built, David's house was splitting. Multiple wives, rival sons, an aging king haunted by his past. The death of Uriah, the cries of Bathsheba, the rebellion of Absalom. These are not mere stories. They reflect a fragile new monarchy, barely rooted, torn between old tribal customs and the emerging central power of kingship. David's Jerusalem was not golden. It was tense, unresolved, but it was alive. The tomb of the king. The Bible states David was buried in the city he made his own, 1 Kings 2 verse 10. Archaeological evidence for his tomb is elusive, but tradition places it near the southern slope of the city of David. Tombs from the period do exist. Rock-cut burial caves with benches and niches. Chambered family tombs sealed with stone discs. Ceremonial ossuaries used generations later. His bones may be long lost, but his absence is present. A city that holds its king holds more than power. It holds memory. Night in the city of the king. The city is quiet again. David is gone. The torchlight flickers on alley walls. A dog barks once. A fig falls. A woman hums a lullaby to her child beneath a straw canopy. The Gien spring still flows, now walled, guarded, sacred. And above, in a room with no throne, a young man listens to wind passing over the rooftops. His name is Solomon, but he is not yet king. Not yet. The body of David lay cold in a tomb of hewn stone, and beside it, a kingdom waited to know who would rise next. Not with parades, not with heralds, but with unease. Because the house of David was no longer united. It was a house of many sons, many mothers, many ambitions. And Solomon, still young, still soft of face, was not the oldest, not the strongest, not the first in line. But he had the whisper of the prophet and the quiet fire of a mother who would not let her son be forgotten. The trouble of succession. In the ancient Near East, succession was rarely peaceful. Kingdoms did not always follow strict primogeniture. Instead, power often passed to the son backed by the court, the priesthood, or the army. Solomon's father, David, had many wives and concubines. The Bible names at least 19 sons, 1 Chronicles 3 verses 1 to 9, though there were likely more. Among them, Amnon, the firstborn, killed by his brother for violating his sister. Absalom, the rebel prince, slain in a tragic forest ambush. Adonijah, handsome and ambitious, who saw an opportunity when David grew old and weak. And then, Solomon, young, quiet, bookish, a son of Bathsheba, a woman once touched by scandal. No one expected him to wear the crown, until the silence of succession cracked open. Adonijah's bold move. The Book of Kings opens not with coronation, but with crisis. Now King David was old and stricken in years. Adonijah, sensing his father's weakness, declared himself king. He prepared chariots, gathered 50 men to run before him, feasted with military leaders and influential priests. It was a coup in progress, cloaked in ceremony. But he did not invite Nathan, the trusted prophet, Benaiah, commander of David's elite guard, Zadok, the priest loyal to the royal household, nor Solomon, whom the prophet had long believed would inherit the promise. This exclusion was political and fatal. The whispered coronation. Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, went to David. Weak, cold, bedridden. The king barely spoke, but his memory still held fire. And when reminded of his oath, he did not hesitate. As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my soul out of all distress, even as I swore unto you by the Lord God of Israel, saying, Solomon thy son shall reign after me, so will I do this day. 1 Kings 1 verses 29 to 30. David summoned Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the warrior. They took Solomon to Gien, the sacred spring, anointed him with oil, blew the ram's horn, and proclaimed him king, not in the palace, but by the spring. Why there? Because the Gien was old, older than David, older than Jebusites, older than war. To crown a king by water was to bind him to the lifeblood of the land. Archaeological echoes of a ritual. While no specific coronation site has been confirmed, archaeologists have identified large open courtyards, public platforms, and ritual zones near the city of David. The Gien spring, once exposed, had long been encased by massive stone towers, with guard points and ritual alcoves. Some scholars suggest it was a cultic center before Israelite occupation, a sacred site associated with fertility, blessing, and divine favor. It is not unlikely that Solomon's public anointing happened here, both as a political display and a symbolic act. The materials used in anointing, as described in Exodus and preserved in later rituals, included olive oil, blended with myrrh and cinnamon, poured from a horn, not a flask, to signify divine blessing. We imagine Solomon standing among elders and guards, eyes wide with disbelief. The scent of oil heavy in the air, the people shouting, and Solomon, still unsure what had just begun. The resistance fades, but not quietly. When word of Solomon's crowning reached Adonijah's feast, the room fell silent. The sound of the ram's horn, the voices of the people, the realization that David had spoken, and Solomon now wore the crown. Adonijah fled, sought sanctuary at the altar, clutched the horns of the sacred structure, a plea for mercy. And Solomon granted it. If he proves himself loyal, not a hair on his head will fall. But this was only the beginning. Administrative structure of a young king. The first act of Solomon's rule was not vengeance. It was organization. From archaeological and biblical sources, we see a clear picture of Solomon's early administration. The kingdom was divided into 12 districts, 1 Kings 4 verses 7 to 19, not by tribal lines, but by resource zones. This broke up old loyalties and allowed better tax collection and provisioning. Each district was assigned a governor, tasked with supplying the royal court 1 month per year. Central storehouses were developed, some of which have been excavated at sites like Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, large structures with pillared halls, granaries, and ashlar masonry. These reforms signaled a centralized, bureaucratic monarchy, no longer tribal or kin-based, but national. Solomon, though young, ruled with precision. Early architectural projects. Archaeological layers across Jerusalem, Megiddo, Gezer, and Hazor show construction techniques associated with the united monarchy. Four-room houses, typical of Israelite settlements. Massive gates with 6 chambers, matching biblical descriptions. Casemate walls, with double-chambered defense structures. Use of ashlar stone blocks, carved and fitted without mortar. Administrative buildings, identifiable by pottery types, seal impressions, and layout. Though debate continues about precise dating, many scholars agree these 10th century BC levels reflect major state-driven construction, possibly under Solomon or his successors. It was not the grandeur yet, but the bones of a coming empire. The human moment, Solomon alone. Let us now turn inward. Imagine Solomon that first night, after the horns have quieted, after his mother has kissed his forehead, after the guards are posted, and the scribes have begun their ledgers. He lies awake, in a room lit only by oil lamps, the linen pillow too warm, the weight of the crown not yet on his head, but pressing on his mind. He thinks of David's harp, of the rooftop walks, of a city still small, but watching. And somewhere beyond his window, a bird sings. A night bird, lonely, persistent. He wonders if it sang for his father, too. The crown is not loud. Kingship begins not with a roar, but a murmur. There is no coronation ceremony detailed in gold. No feast that the Bible records. Only oil, only breath, only silence. Solomon was not born for this, but he accepted it, not because he craved power, but because the time required it. And history would remember that the greatest builders often begin in silence. The temple did not begin with gold. It did not begin with stone. It began with stillness. Not a stillness of inaction, but the kind of silence a person holds when stepping barefoot into holy ground. The boy who once lay awake under oil lamps now stands atop Mount Moriah, and in his hands are not scrolls, but dreams, drawn not only from prophets, but from patterns, Egyptian courts, Phoenician columns, Canaanite thresholds, and the instructions of a father whose voice had faded, but not disappeared. The biblical blueprint. The Book of Kings provides one of the most detailed architectural descriptions in ancient Hebrew literature. Solomon's temple, as described in 1 Kings 6, had precise measurements. 60 cubits long, 90 feet / 27 meters. 20 cubits wide, 30 feet / 9 meters. 30 cubits high, 45 feet / 13.5 meters. It had 3 distinct zones. The ulam, entrance porch. The hekel, main hall / holy place. The debir, inner sanctuary / holy of holies. It was lined with cedar wood, overlaid with pure gold. Carvings of palms, open flowers, and cherubim adorned its walls. Bronze pillars, Jachin and Boaz, flanked the entrance, standing as silent guardians. The temple faced east, toward the rising sun. But what it contained faced inward, toward mystery, materials, and methods. No temple could be built without the hands of many. The text tells us 70,000 laborers bore burdens. 80,000 stonecutters hewed in the mountains. 3,300 overseers guided the work. These numbers may be literary exaggeration, yet they convey a massive state-run operation. Limestone was quarried from beneath Jerusalem itself. Tunnels beneath the Old City show extensive underground stone-cutting, many dating to the First Temple period. Cedar and cypress were floated from Lebanon, a maritime trade operated by King Hiram of Tyre, who provided artisans and timber in exchange for wheat and oil. Nut-and-bolt bronze work was crafted in the Jordan Valley by Hiram Abi, a craftsman skilled in bronze. His work included the Molten Sea, a massive basin resting on 12 oxen, 10 bronze stands and lavers for ritual washing, tools, altar accessories, and intricate designs of pomegranates and lilies. No iron was heard on the Temple Mount. The stones were prepared in quarries, shaped in silence. And the house, when it was in building, was built of stone made ready before it was brought thither, so that there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron heard in the house, while it was in building. Silence was the first law of the sacred space. Archaeological echoes of Solomon's temple. Though the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, clues remain. Awful excavations south of Temple Mount, massive foundation walls and stone platforms, pottery layers dating to the 10th century BCE, defensive towers and stepped stone structures, Temple Mount sifting project, small fragments of First Temple period ceramics, seal impressions with ancient Hebrew script, bully, ivory fragments, possibly part of elite furnishings, Tel Arad, southern Judah. A small temple dated to the 9th century BCE, reflects a similar tripartite structure, porch, hall, sanctuary, Indara Temple, Syria, massive Iron Age temple with almost identical proportions, carved guardian creatures, floral motifs, parallels to biblical descriptions. While we cannot point to one stone and say, this was Solomon's, we can walk the pattern, because the pattern survives. Sacred space, the meaning of the layout. The tripartite design was not unique to Israel. Across the Levant and Mesopotamia, temples followed a 3-zone format. An outer court, open to people. A holy hall, where priests entered. An inner chamber, the most sacred, often dark and windowless, in Solomon's temple. The debir, the Holy of Holies, was a perfect cube. 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits. No light entered it. It was entered only once a year by the high priest. It held nothing but the Ark of the Covenant, and in that space, they believed the presence of God rested, not in image, not in statue, but in absence, a silence that meant everything. Symbolism and architecture. Every detail of the temple carried symbolic meaning. The pillars, Jachin, he will establish and Boaz, in him is strength a duality of stability and power. Cherubim, winged figures, not the cherubs of later art, but fearsome guardians, facing inward, wings outstretched. Pomegranates and lilies, symbols of fertility, purity, and abundance, gold overlay, not just for beauty, but to reflect heaven's radiance, to make the unseen world feel near. The temple was a microcosm of creation. Outer court equals the earth, inner hall equals the heavens. Holy of Holies equals the dwelling of God. To walk through it was to move from the world into the sacred, a whispered journey through the construction. Let us follow the workers. A boy carries a jar of water up the slope. His father is a stonecutter. His palms are thick with lime dust, fingernails cracked. He lays another block, fitted so finely it does not need mortar. It slides into place with a soft thump. Final, eternal. Near the gate, carpenters shave cedar into beams. They hum a northern tune, something Phoenician, almost like birdsong. A scribe sits beneath a fig tree, logging shipments with a reed pen. A woman gathers pomegranate seeds to press into red dye for priestly garments. And Solomon watches. He does not speak. He walks the edges of the future, tracing the lines of his father's dream. Preparation of the priesthood. The temple was not only walls. It required priests, trained, pure, and ritually prepared. The priesthood descended from Aaron, Moses' brother. In Solomon's time, the high priest was Zadok, a loyal supporter of David's house. Biblical law, Leviticus, Exodus, required garments of linen and gold. Consecration rituals involving oil, blood, and water. Daily offerings, grain, incense, animals. Weekly and seasonal festivals. Though we lack direct archaeological evidence of Zadok's priesthood, we find parallels at Kuntalit Ajrud, with inscriptions to Yahweh and Asherah, suggesting early Israelite ritual practice. Tel Moza, near Jerusalem, a temple site with altars, figurines, and cultic vessels dating to 9th to 8th century BCE. These show a diverse, evolving religious system, not always aligned with later biblical orthodoxy. But Solomon's temple would set the mold. The night before the completion, it has been 7 years. The final stone is in place. The last curtain sewn. The utensils polished. The ark, still hidden, waits. And Solomon cannot sleep. He walks alone, past the storehouses, the gates, the pillar-lined corridor. He touches the gold-covered walls, the polished bronze basin. He smells the cedar and prays silently. Will God truly dwell on earth? Even the heavens cannot contain you. But if you will listen, if you will hear the cry of your people, the wind moves through the olive trees. No fire falls, no voice speaks, but the night listens. A temple made with hands. The temple was not heaven. It was made with hands. Hands that bled, hands that sang, hands that dropped with exhaustion but returned the next day. It was not a monument to Solomon. It was a monument to hope. And when it was finished, the people did not shout. They bowed, face to stone, hearts in silence. Because the sacred is not always loud. Before Solomon raised his temple, before the stones were laid and the gold was shaped, there was wood, wood from trees that had stood in mist for centuries. Trees born on cold mountain spines. Cedar, the breath of the north. It did not grow in Judah. It did not grow in the hills of Ephraim. It grew where the air smelled of salt and snow, in Lebanon. And to bring it, Solomon needed more than workers. He needed an ally. Hiram of Tyre, king, merchant, craftsman. The Bible introduces Hiram, king of Tyre, as a friend of David and Solomon. And Hiram sent servants unto Solomon, for he had heard that they had anointed him king. For Hiram had ever been a lover of David. 1 Kings 5 verse 1. Tyre was a Phoenician city, a maritime power known for advanced craftsmanship in wood, metal, and textiles. Vast cedar forests in the Lebanon range. Shipbuilding and sea trade across the Mediterranean. Skilled artisans fluent in Canaanite and Egyptian styles. Though Phoenician records of this period are scarce, Assyrian inscriptions, Egyptian tomb paintings, and archaeology from Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos show a thriving, sea-facing civilization. Hiram was not just a king. He was a builder, a trader, and a negotiator. And Solomon, young, ambitious, respectful, knew how to ask. The Timber Treaty. Solomon sent a message. Command them to hew me cedar trees out of Lebanon, and I will give thy servants wages, as thou shalt appoint. 1 Kings 5 verse 6. And Hiram replied with warmth and pride, I will do all thy desire concerning timber of cedar and fir. The deal was struck, a diplomatic and economic partnership. In exchange for cedar and skilled workers, Solomon sent wheat, olive oil, wine, possibly silver, copper, and cloth. From a historical standpoint, this represents a mutually beneficial trade agreement between an inland highland kingdom and a coastal commercial empire. Such alliances were common in the Iron Age Levant, supported by marriage ties, shared cultic vocabulary, and merchant networks. But this one built the house of God, cedars of the cloud. The cedars of Lebanon were not ordinary trees. They grew high on Mount Lebanon, reaching 30 to 40 meters, with trunks up to 2.5 meters in diameter. Their wood was aromatic, resin-rich, naturally resistant to rot and insects, straight-grained and ideal for beams. In ancient texts, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Ugaritic, cedar is associated with divinity, royalty, eternity. Egyptians imported cedar for sarcophagi. Mesopotamians used it in ziggurat roofs. And Solomon used it for the temple ceiling, the walls, and the palace. Today, a few ancient groves still survive, protected by the Lebanese government. And when the wind moves through them, it sounds like memory. Transport by sea and ox. How did they move the timber? They shall bring them down from Lebanon unto the sea, and I will convey them by sea in floats unto the place that thou shalt appoint me. 1 Kings 5 verse 9. The cedars were cut in the mountain, dragged by sled or ox cart to the coast, often to Byblos or Tyre, bound into rafts, floated south along the coast to Joppa, modern Jaffa, transported inland to Jerusalem, likely by oxen, across steep roads and rocky trails. This process took months, if not years. Archaeological studies show timber channels carved into stone pathways, ancient port installations in Jaffa with Phoenician pottery, bronze tools and sled grooves along cedar trails in Lebanon. And in every step, the scent of resin, the creak of rope, the call of sea birds. The builders from the sea. Hiram also sent craftsmen, among them Hiram Abi, not the king, but a namesake, described as a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass. He worked in bronze, the molten sea, lavers, altarpieces, possibly also stone, ivory, and wood inlay. The artisans were not Israelite. They were Phoenician, fluent in the aesthetic language of the coast. Intricate carvings of palm trees and lions, symbolic pomegranate clusters, balanced columns and capitals, sometimes in Proto-Ionic style. Their presence speaks to a multicultural workforce, where faiths and tongues mingled, not always in conflict, but in creation. A human moment, the arrival. Imagine this scene. A raft arrives at Joppa. Cedar logs, lashed tight, glisten with seawater. The scent strikes first, sweet, dark, sharp. A boy helping the porter sneezes, too much dust, too much sap. He watches as men from the north speak in strange tongues. One carves a symbol into the end of a beam, a mark of measurement or pride. The logs are lifted with ropes onto sleds. Oxen grunt, carts groan, and the journey up to Jerusalem begins. Each tree, each beam, is a breath from another land, a memory carried from cloud to stone. In the archives of time, though no cedar logs survive, archaeology has confirmed. Trade records in Ugarit and Byblos mention cedar exports. Tomb paintings in Egypt depict Phoenician timber shipments. Excavations at Megiddo, Gezer, and Hazor reveal Phoenician-style architecture and wood joinery techniques. Even the presence of Phoenician inscriptions and imported goods in Judah supports the Bible's claim of close Israel-Tyre relations in the 10th century BCE. Solomon may have built the house, but it stood because others gave what they had. Diplomacy in silence. There is no record of Solomon and Hiram ever meeting in person. Their alliance was word-based, trust-based, and resource-based. But the bond endured for decades. A peaceful friendship in a region so often divided. There was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and they too made a league. 1 Kings 5 verse 12. The cedars were not only materials, they were signs of trust, that two kings could share in something holy. The temple rises, with trees from the mist. As the beams were hoisted into place, no one spoke. The cedar touched stone. Gold was laid over wood. Carvings were inked with care, and the air smelled of Tyre. Solomon knew this house was not just his. It was built with friendship. It was carved with sea hands, and its walls carried voices from other lands. The temple rose in gold. The palaces gleamed with cedar. But beneath it all lay clay, soft, shaped, baked in sun and fire, stamped with marks few would ever read. The throne may shine in the eyes of the world, but a kingdom lives and dies by its invisible systems. And Solomon was a master of systems, from tribes to bureaucracy. When David ruled, power still flowed through tribal alliances, organic, personal, rooted in kinship. But Solomon saw the fragility in that. He knew that dreams built on bloodline could fracture. He needed something more durable, structure. So he reorganized the kingdom into 12 administrative districts, described in 1 Kings 4 verses 7 to 19. Each district had a governor, Hebrew, Natsaf, responsibility to supply the royal court with provisions 1 month per year, authority to collect taxes, organize labor, and report to the palace. Importantly, these boundaries cut across tribal lines, intentionally dissolving old loyalties to create a centralized state. This was radical governance in Iron Age Canaan, and it would leave its mark in the soil. Archaeological signs of centralized control. Across ancient Judah and Israel, archaeologists have uncovered key markers of a bureaucratic kingdom. LMLK seal impressions belonging to the king, found on large storage jars, especially in sites like Lachish, Jerusalem, Ramat Rahel, and Tel Beit Mirsim, typically stamped near the handle with the words LMLK and a place name. Dated to the late 8th century BCE, but likely following practices developed earlier in Solomon's reign. These stamps suggest a state-managed redistribution system, warehouses filled with grain, wine, and oil, local officials tracking supply lines, four-handled storage jars, massive jars, 30 to 40 gallons, used for grain and oil, often buried in palace courtyards, administrative buildings, and fortresses, associated with large-scale food collection and storage, critical in years of drought. Administrative buildings. At sites like Hazor, Gezer, and Megiddo, we find pillared storehouses with thick walls and raised floors, seals, weights, and scribe tools. Phoenician-style ashlar masonry, indicating trained labor and royal funding. This was not tribal economy. This was a state economy, built to supply thousands, pay workers, and stockpile for lean years. The scribes and the clay. Every system needs record keepers. In Solomon's Jerusalem, scribes worked in stone rooms, seated on mats, papyrus stretched on low tables, reeds dipped in carbon ink, clay tablets marked with incipient Hebrew, Phoenician, or cuneiform. Their tools were modest: bone or ivory styluses, stone inkwells, sealing rings worn on leather cords. These scribes recorded tax receipts, land agreements, labor rosters, marriage contracts, grain weights, imports of foreign goods. Their world was ink and silence. Their names lost, but their lines endure, buried beneath layers of ash and dust. Corvée labor, a hidden cost. And King Solomon raised a levy out of all Israel, and the levy was 30,000 men. Solomon did not use slaves in the temple's construction, but he did use conscripted labor, a common ancient practice known as corvée. Men served 1 month in 12, then returned home. They built roads, quarried stone, moved timber, raised walls. Archaeological sites show worker encampments with low walls and cooking pits, bronze picks and stone chisels, animal bones from daily rations, mostly sheep and goats. The cost was not in coin, but in time and exhaustion. A kingdom's strength was measured in backs bent beneath the sun. Trade and tribute, Solomon's reach. Solomon's wealth came not just from internal reform, but from international trade and tributary relations. Biblical sources describe trade with Egypt, chariots, horses, linen, maritime expeditions with Phoenicia, ships of Tarshish bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Tribute from surrounding nations, Moab, Edom, Aram, possibly Sheba. From a historical lens, Solomon's reign reflects a brief window of political dominance in the southern Levant. Strategic marriages, e.g., Pharaoh's daughter, to secure peace and trade. Construction of fortified cities along trade routes, Gezer, Hazar, Megiddo. Artifacts like Egyptian amulets, Phoenician ivory inlays, and Arabian incense burners show a blended, elite material culture. Solomon's court was not isolated. It was global. For its time, it was cosmopolitan. A whispered glimpse, a night in the treasury. Let us drift into a quieter space. A narrow chamber beneath the palace. Stone walls, no windows. Clay jars stacked floor to ceiling. A guard drowses near the entrance, hand on his spear. Inside, a scribe works by oil lamp. He counts, aloud, softly, barley, dates, lentils. He seals a scroll with red wax, presses a carved ring. Outside, a laborer unloads another cart. He has walked from Hebron for 4 days. His feet are cracked, but he carries the grain proudly. Tomorrow he will rest. Tonight, he works for the king, and the king sleeps above them all. Currency and exchange. Though coinage would not emerge until centuries later, Solomon's economy still functioned with measured exchange. Weighed silver, in units called shekels, often as cut pieces. Beads, rings, and ingots, used for high-value barter. Barley and oil, as base units in local markets. Archaeologists have found balance weights in stone and bronze, marked in shekels, bekas, giras, stored in leather pouches, tied to scribe belts. This wasn't money as we know it, but it worked, quietly, efficiently, enough to feed thousands, enough to build a dream. Systems of dust and memory. We speak of palaces, we speak of temples, but empires rise, on ledgers, and the ones who kept them, the nameless scribes, the burdened taxmen, the barefoot grain porters. They held the kingdom together, one scroll at a time. Their names are not carved in gold. Their words were not sung, but their fingerprints still press into the clay beneath our feet. The judgment hall, 2 mothers, 1 child, and the silence before a sword is drawn. The halls of justice in Solomon's palace were quiet, not from lack of suffering, but from the weight of what it meant to speak before the king. The men who came here brought debts. The women brought sorrow. And one morning, like any other, 2 women stood before Solomon, their faces drawn, their shawls damp with grief. And between them, 1 child. The moment would become legend. But it began, in pain, the biblical account. Then there came 2 women that were harlots unto the king and stood before him. And the one woman said, O my Lord, I and this woman dwell in one house. I gave birth, and she gave birth 3 days later. But her child died in the night, and she switched the babies. Now, O king, give us justice. It is a simple narrative, yet one that resonates across time. Solomon listens. He asks no questions. He makes no accusations. Instead, He calls for a sword. Divide the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other. One woman agrees. The other pleads, give her the child, only do not slay it. And Solomon says, she is the mother. A judgment of wisdom, a verdict of the heart, a scene that has echoed through courts, art, and legend for 3,000 years. Justice in the ancient Near East. But to truly understand the moment, we must look beyond Scripture to the legal culture that surrounded Solomon. Justice in the ancient world was public, performed, rooted in honor and divine authority. Kings were not simply rulers. They were judges, priests, and interpreters of cosmic order. Ma'at in Egypt, Shamash in Mesopotamia, Torah in Israel. Solomon's ruling reflects elements of Canaanite and Israelite tribal justice. Mesopotamian-style judgment rituals, where the king acts as final arbiter. A dramatic style of decision-making intended not just to resolve, but to reveal legal precedents in history. Mesopotamian parallels. In the Code of Hammurabi, 18th c. BCE, we find similar approaches. If a man brings a charge of sorcery and cannot prove it, he shall be thrown into the river. The idea is not mere punishment, but revelation through action. A verdict that forces the truth to emerge through choice or risk. Solomon's threat to divide the child mirrors this tradition. It tests character, not just evidence. It places pressure on emotion, not logic. It is courtroom psychology. 3,000 years before the term existed. Scroll Egyptian influence. Pharaohs were seen as divine judges, often sitting in open courts. Iconography shows the weighing of the heart, truth and justice as eternal balances. Solomon, as a king trained in regional law and culture, likely absorbed these forms and transformed them into something distinctly Israelite. The women, social context and historical reality. The women in the story are described as harlots, Hebrew, zanat. This word can mean prostitutes, tavern keepers, or simply unmarried women outside social protection. They lived together, likely for mutual support. No male guardian, no husband, vulnerable but resilient. This case would never have made it to the king, unless it had no witnesses, no male elders to resolve it, and no easy truth. Their story is not just moral, it is social commentary on female survival in ancient cities, on maternal identity in patriarchal systems, on how power hears the voiceless. And Solomon, to his credit, hears them. Court architecture and daily rituals. Solomon's palace, according to 1 Kings 7, included a hall of judgment, possibly an open-air courtyard, columns, cedar roof beams, and golden-laid stone, a throne of ivory overlaid with gold, 6 steps leading to it, flanked by lions. Though archaeology has not unearthed this specific hall, parallels at Megiddo and Ramat Rahel show. Large administrative buildings with columned porches. Spaces large enough to hold public hearings. Stone benches, weighing scales, and clay docket tablets. Justice was visible. To accuse was to expose yourself. To answer was to be measured not just in words, but in presence. In this space, Solomon's word was law, but also theater. A whispered performance of wisdom. Let us now return to that morning. Let us walk it slowly. The hall is shaded. 2 women kneel before the throne. One clutches the child. The other, hollow-eyed, stares only at the king. Solomon listens. No gesture, no reaction. Then, with perfect calm, he says, "Bring me a sword." There is no hesitation. A guard steps forward. The room stills. Even the birds fall silent. Divide the living child. And in that moment, truth is not debated. It is drawn out. The real mother breaks, voice trembling, heart exposed. The other remains firm, unmoved. And Solomon has seen enough. A verdict heard across a kingdom. And all Israel heard of the judgment, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him. This story became Solomon's defining legend, the first public display of his famed wisdom. But wisdom here is not mystical. It is emotional intuition, social awareness, ritual drama, and deep human insight. It's not about knowing all things. It's about knowing what moment will reveal the truth. A human moment, Solomon reflects. That night, Solomon sits alone. He holds no sword. He does not smile. He remembers the look in the real mother's eyes. Not joy, but terror. He thinks, how often must I do this? How many hearts must I test? How many wounds must I reopen to know what is right? He does not feel like the wisest man. He feels the weight of every voice that now seeks his judgment. And outside, the city sleeps, justice and stillness. In the end, Solomon's wisdom was not in law. It was in listening, in silence, in knowing when to speak and when to let others reveal themselves. This was not the only trial, but it was the one remembered, because justice, when whispered with truth, becomes eternal, far beyond the hills of Judah, beyond the borders of Canaan, beyond the salt dunes of Edom and the reed marshes of the Nile Delta. There rose a land of frankincense, of gold, of mystery, and from that land came a woman, crowned, veiled, not in submission, but in sovereignty. They called her the Queen of Sheba. She called no man master, and her eyes saw through performance. Who was the Queen of Sheba? The Bible introduces her simply. And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon, she came to prove him with hard questions. 1 Kings 10 verse 1. Sheba, Hebrew, Shiva, likely refers to the Sabaean kingdom, centered in what is now Yemen, at the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula. This region was a hub of incense trade, frankincense, and myrrh, renowned for its queenly rulers and matrilineal customs, connected to trade routes stretching through Arabia, Ethiopia, and the Levant. Alternately, Ethiopian tradition claims her as Makeda, Queen of Aksum, linking the story to East Africa. Modern scholars identify key candidates. The Sabaean kingdom, 8th to 1st centuries BCE, with capital at Merib. The DMT kingdom in Eritrea/Ethiopia, known from inscriptions, both part of a larger trade network that reached across the Red Sea. No single source confirms her name or realm, but the convergence of biblical, South Arabian, and Ethiopian records suggests a queen powerful enough to be remembered by every culture she touched. The incense trade and Arabian wealth. In Solomon's time, the wealth of Sheba flowed through frankincense and myrrh, aromatic resins used in religious rituals, medicine, and burial, gold and gemstones from African mines, exotic spices, animal skins, ivory, and rare woods. Trade routes known as the Incense Road, stretching from Hadramaut to Gaza. Caravans carried goods northward through Dedan, Petra, and Palmyra, to the ports of Gaza, Tyre, and Joppa, and to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Mediterranean world. Archaeological finds confirm Sabaean inscriptions in northern Arabia, South Arabian architecture in Negev trading posts, ivory and exotic woods in palaces across Israelite and Phoenician sites. Sheba was not remote. Sheba was essential, and its queen came to see what Solomon truly was. The journey north, across silence and stone. The Bible speaks of her arrival. She came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices, and very much gold and precious stones. 1 Kings 10 verse 2. Imagine the procession. Camels draped in embroidered saddlecloths, soldiers in linen and bronze, baskets of saffron, onyx, and pounded gold, servants carrying copper basins of incense, silk tents, palm-wrapped wine skins, carved ebony chests. The journey may have taken weeks by sea, from Aden to Elath, then inland, or months by caravan, across northern Arabia. She comes not in fear, but in curiosity, and when she arrives in Jerusalem, the city holds its breath. Solomon's court receives a queen. The queen is greeted not with trumpets, but with silence. She walks through, pillared halls carved with pomegranates, courtyards scented with cedar and crushed fig, golden-laid doors that glint in the morning light, scribes in quiet procession, and finally, a throne room bathed in shadow. Solomon waits, not on his throne, but at the base of its steps. He bows not low, but enough. Their eyes meet, and nothing is said, but everything is understood. The testing of the king. She communed with him of all that was in her heart. She came with riddles, with questions no merchant or priest could answer. Questions of the gods and the stars, the weight of grief and rule, the nature of justice, and the unspoken meanings behind silence. Solomon answers each, not with certainty, but with insight. He does not dominate the dialogue. He listens. He responds with metaphor, story, and stillness. What were the questions? We do not know, because some wisdom was never written down. Historical echoes of royal exchanges. Rulers meeting in dialogue was not uncommon. Across the ancient Near East, Egyptian and Hittite monarchs exchanged letters and gifts. Assyrian kings hosted envoys from Elam, Urartu, and Babylon. Phoenician elites negotiated and shared temples and ceremonial feasts. Archaeological evidence of such meetings includes inscriptions at Ugarit and Mari describing royal dialogues, gifts such as ivory combs, glass vessels, and lapis lazuli amulets, diplomatic correspondence, like the Amarna letters between Egypt and Canaanite rulers. Though no artifacts confirm this specific visit, the structure of the story mirrors real diplomacy, where dialogue was performance, trade was ritual, and recognition was currency. Gifts, memory, and return. She gave the king 120 talents of gold, and of spices very great store. In modern terms, 120 talents of gold equals 4 tons. Spices, likely frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and galbanum. But the real exchange was not gold. It was gaze, respect, and the knowledge that both rulers were more than myths. And King Solomon gave unto the Queen of Sheba all her desire, whatsoever she asked. 1 Kings 10 verse 13. She returned to her land, and history would never forget her. Legends from Ethiopia and Arabia. In Ethiopian tradition, she is Makeda, and she does not return alone. The Kabra Nagast, 14th century CE Ethiopian epic, says, Solomon and Makeda conceived a son, Menelik I. He would later return to Jerusalem, and according to legend, take the Ark of the Covenant to Aksum. This claim, though mythic, has deep cultural importance in Ethiopian history. In Islamic tradition, Quran Surah 27, she is Bilqis, Queen of the South. She is brought before Solomon's court, converted from paganism to monotheism, and praised for her wisdom. These echoes, though divergent, share a universal truth, that a woman of wisdom came from afar, and left behind a silence that still speaks. A human moment, when no words are left. Let us visit the final moment. The queen stands at the top of the stairs. Her caravan waits below. Solomon stands beside her, not as king, but as man. She says nothing. He nods once. The sun is rising. Frankincense curls from brass bowls. Camels groan. Footsteps crunch. And she is gone. But her scent remains. And her questions still echo through the columns. Wisdom meets wisdom. The Queen of Sheba was not tested. She tested. And Solomon did not impress. He responded. In their exchange, brief, precise, and unscripted, we see what greatness looks like. Not power over, but recognition of. 2 sovereigns, 2 worlds, 1 shared breath. Before history moved on, the temple was finished. The palaces stood. The gates gleamed in morning light. Solomon's kingdom had reached its zenith. From Dan to Beersheba, from the sea to the desert, all spoke of peace. Silver was as common as stone, cedar as plentiful as fig trees. But beneath that beauty, there was friction, not loud, not violent, but quiet, like heat that builds beneath sealed stone. Because every golden surface came at a cost, and every kingdom of wisdom is still built by hands that ache. The cost of monumental labor. And this is the account of the forced labor that King Solomon drafted to build the house of the Lord. 1 Kings 9 verse 15. Solomon conscripted tens of thousands, 70,000 carriers, 80,000 stonecutters, 3,300 overseers. These were not slaves, but neither were they volunteers. They were free men, drafted into corvée labor, compelled to serve the state, typically 1 month in 12. Many left families behind, walked for days to reach quarries, forests, construction sites. Some built temples. Some cut rock in the hills of Zerida. Some transported cedar beams in blistering sun. And some never returned home. Archaeological evidence of forced labor. Across ancient Israelite sites, archaeologists have uncovered worker campsites at quarries and construction zones, e.g. near Jerusalem and Megiddo. Simple stone structures, grinding stones, animal bones, and coarse pottery. Temporary in nature, evidence of seasonal occupation. Iron tools, chisels, pick heads, worn blades. Found in stone-cutting zones near Jerusalem, Hazor, Gezer. Human remains. At certain sites, skeletons show signs of spinal compression, arthritic knees, and repetitive stress, likely from heavy lifting and stone transport. These were not slaves in chains, but workers whose bodies bore the kingdom's weight. Their names are not remembered, but their imprints remain. Solomon's critics, then and later. Though the biblical account often glorifies Solomon, there are subtle signs of critique. 1 Kings 12. After Solomon's death, the people beg his son Rehoboam, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Lighten it." The kingdom fractures soon after. 10 tribes break away. Prophets like Ahijah the Shilonite accuse Solomon of oppression and idolatry. Solomon's reign may have been golden from afar, but among his own people, the burden was felt. Even Ecclesiastes, a book long attributed to Solomon, opens with these weary words. Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. It is the voice of someone who had everything, and still felt the emptiness beneath it. Centralization and social strain. Solomon's administration was effective, but it was also exacting. Key policies that caused social pressure. Division into 12 districts, bypassing tribal identities. Heavy taxation to support the royal court, military, and temple. Construction of fortified cities, requiring constant labor. Foreign alliances, including marriages to foreign princesses, which strained religious purity laws. Archaeological correlates. Administrative buildings with controlled grain silos and weighed rations. Massive fortifications at Gezer, Hazor, Megiddo. Phoenician-style luxury items in the capital, not mirrored in rural settlements. This suggests a wealth gap between the royal center and the outlying villages. And that gap widened over time. A whispered moment, a laborer at dusk. Let us visit a worker. He does not speak much. His voice is hoarse from stone dust. He walks barefoot, carries a wooden yoke across his shoulders, hauling water to soften the earth before carving. He is not angry. He is not proud. He is simply tired. His wife waits 3 valleys away. She does not know he will return with a limp. He prays under his breath, not to be rewarded, but to be remembered. Because if the stones will outlive him, let them, at least, bear witness. Foreign marriages and divided devotion. And King Solomon loved many strange women. Solomon's marriages were diplomatic. Pharaoh's daughter, women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and Hittite lands. These unions secured trade and peace. But they also introduced foreign gods, rituals, and altars. His wives turned away his heart after other gods. Archaeology supports the pluralism of religion in Solomon's time. Altars and incense stands found in Judahite homes. Asherah figurines, suggesting a female divine presence. Temples and high places dedicated to Chemosh, Molech, and Baal in surrounding regions. Solomon did not abandon Yahweh, but his devotion became fragmented, and in the silence of his palace, he may have wondered who he truly served. The fire behind the throne. Solomon's court was not without dissent. Some say there were scribes who questioned policy, priests who resisted new rituals, laborers who cursed under their breath, prophets who walked the margins of the city, whispering warnings. But they were quiet until after his death, because while Solomon ruled, his word held the silence. And within that silence, smoke gathered, the beginning of the end. Solomon reigned for 40 years. By the end, the people groaned under taxation. The army stretched to maintain peace. Foreign influence swelled within the palace walls. His own sons vied in secret for favor. And somewhere beneath the Temple Mount, a crack formed, not in stone, but in loyalty. Cracks are slow, invisible, until they are not. Glory, reconsidered. The kingdom still stood. The walls still held. But the weight was becoming audible, not in rebellion, not yet, but in sighs, in missed harvests, in footsteps that dragged more than they walked. Solomon looked over his city and saw the sun on gold. But beneath him, the people looked up and saw a man they once revered, now distant. Every king dies, every crown falls, but some stones remain. And sometimes, that is all history leaves us. Not a voice, not a face, just a foundation. Rough, weathered, still warm, somehow, with the breath of forgotten prayers. Solomon died, his body placed in silence, his name whispered for generations. But the stones he laid, they never stopped listening. The death of the king. And Solomon slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David his father. There is no description of his death, no account of grief, or mourning, or final words. Just that he was buried in the same city he had adorned with gold. Archaeological digs in the city of David, just south of the Temple Mount, have uncovered rock-cut tombs, limestone burial chambers, family sepulchres with bench graves, funerary vessels, beads, and seals. But Solomon's tomb remains unfound. Perhaps it is beneath a modern road. Perhaps it was destroyed. Or perhaps it waits, quietly, for someone to listen beneath the dust. The splintering of the kingdom. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, took the throne. But his rule began not with celebration, but with protest. Your father made our yoke heavy. Lighten it, and we will serve you. He refused, and 10 of the 12 tribes broke away. The united monarchy fractured. The north became Israel. The south remained Judah. Jerusalem lost its reach and gained a shadow. The golden age had ended, but the stones remained. Stones across time, layers beneath the city. Jerusalem is not built in one layer. It is a city of strata, each century laid atop the last. Archaeologists have uncovered Solomonic-era walls, large ashlar blocks with Phoenician influence, storage complexes, perhaps tied to Solomon's palace, seal impressions bearing names like Ahiav and Shebna, officials of the royal court, remains of fortification towers and public buildings, fragmentary evidence of the Ophel, the administrative district just below the temple. These stones tell stories not through words, but through alignment, material, and context. They do not shout. They whisper. The Babylonian fire. In 586 BCE, the Babylonians came. They tore down the walls, burned the temple, carried the ark, or whatever remained of it, into myth. The city was emptied, and the first temple period ended in ash. Biblical laments cry, "How doth the city sit solitary, that was full of people?" Lamentations 1 verse 1. The stones were blackened, but not gone, and when the exiles returned, they rebuilt. On top of the old, one foundation over another. Memory pressed into rock. The hands that dig. In the 19th and 20th centuries, foreign explorers came with picks and notebooks. Then Israeli archaeologists came with brushes and precision. They found Warren's shaft, The tunnel Solomon may have known. Hezekiah's tunnel, chiseled through bedrock to redirect water. Bully, clay seals from royal scribes. Ivory fragments, Phoenician pottery, and incense altars. Each find is not a relic. It is a question. Who placed it? What were they thinking? Did they know that 3,000 years later, someone would hold their fragment in gloved hands? A whispered walk, the modern ruins. Now walk with me. It's evening in Jerusalem. The sun kisses the stones a final time. Tourists have left the archaeological park, and only one man remains, an old guide, brushing dust from a carved threshold. He touches the rock gently, not to clean it, but to listen. He doesn't know if Solomon ever stood here, but he feels something, a shape, a weight, a hush, the kind of silence that has seen too much and still welcomes the present. What the temple meant and still means. Though the temple no longer stands, its structure, rituals, and symbolism remain foundational too. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, with the dome of the rock atop its probable location. Its memory lives in liturgies, architecture, the shape of synagogues and churches, the longing of exiles, the dreams of pilgrims. The Western Wall, a remnant of Herod's later temple, still draws prayers in paper and tears. But beneath it, beneath all the layers, may still lie stones that Solomon placed, if not physically, then spiritually, because foundations are not only built in stone, they're built in story. What wisdom leaves behind? Solomon wrote Proverbs. He built cities. He rendered judgments. But all that fades. What endures? Perhaps it's this: the willingness to build, to search for order, to trust that silence can hold meaning. Wisdom isn't knowing everything. It's knowing what matters and letting go of what doesn't. And sometimes, it's carving stone, knowing you'll never live to see who finds it again. The quiet of endings. So let us end this chapter as softly as it began. No trumpets, no drama, just the stone, and the dust, and the wind moving across the ridge that was once called the City of David. It is quieter now, but not empty, because somewhere beneath the earth, Solomon's hands once pressed mortar, once blessed a wall, once dreamed of a house where wisdom could live. And in a way, that house still stands. Inside the temple was complete. The ark rested behind its veil. Pilgrims came with offerings. Priests tended the flame. And yet Solomon did not stop building, because a king who rules with wisdom still dreams in stone. He dreamed of strongholds at the edges of the land, of cities that would speak, not in words, but in walls, a message to enemies, a comfort to allies, and perhaps a quiet confession to himself. That glory, if not guarded, would not last. The fortresses of Solomon, biblical account. And this is the reason of the levy which King Solomon raised, for to build the house of the Lord and the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, and Megiddo, and Gezer. 1 Kings 9 verse 15. This passage is brief, a single verse, but it contains a blueprint. Solomon did not only build temples and palaces. He built fortified cities at the kingdom's frontiers. Hazor, far north, near the foothills of Mount Hermon. Megiddo, overlooking the vital Jezreel Valley. Gezer, guarding the western approach from the Philistine plain. Each one was a gate, a shield, a stage for administration and control. Each one still whispers through dust. Archaeological evidence, the three-way pattern. In the 20th century, archaeologist Yigal Yadin noticed something remarkable. At Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, excavations revealed monumental six-chambered city gates, ashlar, cut stone, casemate walls, public buildings with pillared halls, large storage facilities and granaries. The gates were built in the same style, with the same dimensions, likely by the same architects. This was not coincidence. It was a royal building program, centrally planned, likely directed by Jerusalem. Radiocarbon dating and pottery analysis placed these structures in the 10th century BCE, aligning with Solomon's reign. These cities were not tribal. They were imperial outposts. The architecture of authority. Let's examine the gates themselves. Each gate consisted of 6 chambers, 3 on each side, opening into a central passageway, guard towers flanking the entrance, upper rooms for archers or watchmen, benches, possibly for elders or scribes. Beyond the gate lay a wide plaza, used for public gatherings or trade. Administrative buildings, stone halls with storage pits and pottery-lined walls. Cisterns to preserve water in siege. Massive outer walls, sometimes double-layered with casemates, hollow chambers filled with earth during attacks. These cities were built to endure, to project power, and to show that the king who built the temple could also build a sword. The northern tension, Hazor. Hazor was the northern crown jewel, once a Canaanite city of vast wealth, the head of all those kingdoms, Joshua 11 verse 10. It had been burned during Israelite conquest. Solomon rebuilt it. Excavations show massive gates, fortified towers, a royal citadel with Phoenician-style masonry, ceramic imports from Syria, Phoenicia, and Mesopotamia. Hazor guarded the upper Jordan Valley. It watched the roads to Aram, Syria, whose king would soon rise to challenge Solomon's son. In Solomon's day, it was peace, but the stone was laid for war. The Valley of Watchers, Megiddo. Megiddo sat above the Jezreel Valley, the crossroads of the ancient world. Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon all fought here. Later, in Revelation, it would be called Armageddon, the final battlefield. In Solomon's time, it became a royal fortress, a 6-chambered gate cut into rock, ashlar palaces with pillared rooms, stables large enough for hundreds of horses, underground water shafts to hide supplies in siege. Trade passed through Megiddo, but so did warning. The gate stood as a message. You may pass, but you are seen. The western wall, Gezer. Gezer guarded the route from the Philistine plain to Jerusalem. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and taken Gezer, and burned it with fire, and gave it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. 1 Kings 9 verse 16. This is the only known case of an Egyptian king giving land to an Israelite. Archaeological evidence confirms. Gezer had been violently destroyed. Solomon rebuilt it in the same pattern as Hazor and Megiddo. A massive city gate, defensive walls, and elite housing followed. This marriage was not just alliance. It was strategy, and the city was its stone signature. Life in the border cities. What was it like to live there? Let us slow time. A young scribe sits by the inner gate of Gezer. He records grain tallies on clay, watches as carts pass through the gate, measures silver in weighted cups. Children run barefoot across the plaza. Soldiers polish bronze blades. A priest lights incense near the city altar. The city is not quiet, but not loud. It hums with discipline. Its walls cast long shadows. And in the main hall, a governor reads a letter from Jerusalem, sealed in wax. The reach and the strain. Solomon's control was impressive, but control brings weight. Fortresses must be staffed. Roads must be maintained. Tax must be collected. Governors must remain loyal. Each city was a node in a growing network of power. But each node also had edges, where dissent could bloom. And even as walls rose, the people inside them sometimes whispered. Not all were pleased. Not all believed. Some simply endured. A whispered warning. In the north, a prophet walks the border. His name is forgotten, but his message is not. He sees the cities rising. He hears the coins in the court. He watches as stone replaces trust. He says nothing to the king. But in a tavern, one night, he mutters, "You can build 1,000 gates, but one cracked heart will let the enemy in." No one listens. Not yet. But the wind carries the words. And the stones hear everything. The sound of walls. Let us end this segment where we began, not with kings or battles, but with a wall. A single stone, 3,000 years old, still standing at Hazor. It has seen peace. It has seen fire. It has heard laughter, footsteps, and screams. But tonight it is silent. A bird nests above it, and below, a fox moves through grass. Solomon is long gone, but the wall he built still breathes, and the kingdom he imagined still echoes in the stone. There are cities for kings, and cities for keeping kings safe. Gezer was not Jerusalem. It was not sacred. It was not crowned with gold or scented with incense from Sheba. But Gezer was important, because before a temple can shine, the road to it must be held. And Gezer stood at the edge, between the highlands and the Philistine plain, between peace and whatever might come with the morning mist, a gift of stone and smoke. Pharaoh gave it for a dowry unto his daughter, Solomon's wife. Few biblical verses carry such quiet significance. An Egyptian king, likely Sasan's I or Shoshenq I, depending on chronology, conquered the Canaanite city of Gezer, burned it, and gave it as a wedding gift to Solomon. This was not just land. It was a gesture of alliance, of shared interest, of quiet acknowledgement that Solomon's Judah was worth courting. Archaeology supports this narrative. Excavations at Tel Gezer revealed a burn layer, dated to the late 10th century BCE, followed by a massive building phase, including a six-chambered gate, Solomonic in style. This was not a town patched together. It was reborn with intention. The Solomonic gate, architecture of power. The city gate at Gezer is among the best preserved of all ancient Israel. It features 6 chambers, 3 on either side of a central corridor, guard platforms and upper galleries, ashlar masonry, massive rectangular stones, laid without mortar. An adjoining plaza, likely used for public gatherings and legal proceedings. This structure matches similar gates at Hazor and Megiddo, suggesting a unified state design. To walk through the gate was to be inspected, counted, marked as friend or foreigner. The gate was not only a defense. It was a message. This land is ruled. This city is watched. Inside the walls, storage, supply, and settlement. Beyond the gate, the city spread in tiers. Storehouses lined with large jars for wine, oil, grain. Administrative buildings with thick walls and central courtyards. Housing compounds, small, often shared by multiple families. Open-air hearths, pottery kilns, grinding stations. Archaeologists uncovered dozens of LMLK seal impressions stamped on jar handles belonging to the king. Iron tools, bronze arrowheads, loom weights, and spindle whorls. Child burials beneath domestic floors, a common tradition in ancient Canaanite and Israelite homes. Figurines of Asherah and bull motifs, hinting at diverse religious practices. Gezer was not holy. It was functional. It was lived in. And it was loyal, but perhaps not always willingly. A day in the life, the governor's scribe. Let us slow time. It is morning in Gezer. A scribe in his mid-30s sits cross-legged in the shade of the city gate. His tablet is damp with ink. He writes with a steady hand, recording grain deliveries from the southern fields. He knows the names of the farmers, knows which districts send more, which lag. He watches the sun pass between the gate's shadow lines. Behind him, the governor speaks with 2 elders, a dispute over grazing rights. Beyond them, soldiers train in the plaza, dust rising with every step. The scribe does not smile. He does not frown. He is a stone among stones, unnoticed, but holding the wall. Quiet tensions, the price of obedience. Not all in Gezer were content. The corvée labor for Jerusalem's temple had touched this city. Men had been sent to cut timber, move stones, dig drainage channels. Some did not return. Others returned changed, quieter, leaner. Taxes were paid, in grain, in wool, in labor, and those Solomon ruled from afar. His hand reached every hearth. A blacksmith mutters over bent tools. We sharpen their swords, but hold no shield ourselves. A woman weaves, shaking her head. The palace eats better than we do. These whispers were not rebellion, but they were real, and they echoed in the silence of the night. Worship beyond the temple. Gezer had no grand altar. But people worshipped still, at household shrines, on rooftops with incense and song, in small stone courtyards with clay offerings. Archaeologists uncovered standing stones, maspot, likely for local ancestral or divine veneration, figurines of female deities, perhaps Ashera, burnt offerings, not in temple fashion, but folk ritual, passed down from older traditions. Solomon had built the temple, but faith does not centralize so easily. Even in a fortified city, the heart still bowed in its own way. A night at the gate. As dusk falls, the city gate is closed. Guards settle in. Children run home. Fires are lit. The scribe tucks his scroll into a sealed jar. The governor counts the jars of grain by torchlight. The stars rise above the wall. Dogs bark once, then settle. And Solomon, far away in Jerusalem, reads a report in his private hall. Gezer holds. Stores full. Gate strong. Spirits steady. It is the last line that he reads twice. Because he knows. Strong walls cannot keep in what festers inside. The weight of the edge. Gezer was never the center. It did not hold the ark. It did not hear the prophet. It did not dine with queens. But Gezer held the line. It was the edge, the kingdom's threshold, a place where people worked, bled, and buried their children without song. It was loyal, but it was tired, and the stone, though strong, had begun to crack in places only the night could see. Some cities rise slowly, some rise in silence, and some rise in the shadow of every king that ever walked the land. Megiddo was the last kind. It did not ask for peace. It did not dream of temples. It was built to endure, and rebuilt again, because power needs roads, and roads need gates, and gates need cities to hold them. The Jezreel Valley, crossroads of the Levant. Megiddo sits atop a low hill at the edge of the Jezreel Valley, one of the most fertile and strategic corridors in the ancient Near East. From this valley, roads stretched north to Phoenicia and Aram, modern Lebanon and Syria, east to Gilead and Ammon, west to the sea, toward Tyre and Egypt, south to Jerusalem and the Judean highlands. Whoever controlled Megiddo controlled passage, trade, military movement, and information. Egyptian pharaohs fought here. Assyrians marched through. And in Solomon's time, it became a fortified symbol of centralized power. The city gates, Solomonic signature. Like Hazor and Gezer, Megiddo features a six-chambered gate, discovered in the 1930s and confirmed by later excavations. The gate includes 3 rooms on each side of the main passage, thick ashlar masonry, upper walkways and inner guard points, adjacent paved plaza, large enough for public gathering. Beyond the gate, broad streets, administrative complexes, storehouses, often with drainage basins, and rows of stables. These were not tribal huts. This was a military administrative hub. Solomon's architects were not just building cities. They were stamping an identity. The stables of Megiddo. Among the most striking features are the massive stable complexes, capable of housing hundreds of horses. Each stable hall includes stone pillars, drilled to anchor tethers, feed troughs along both sides, central aisles for handlers, carefully laid stone paving, sloped for waste drainage. These stables reflect a chariot-based military strategy, influence from Egyptian and Phoenician styles, a deliberate attempt to create a professional cavalry system. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Though the numbers may be exaggerated, the infrastructure was real. Megiddo was not just a city. It was a garrison, archaeological finds, traces of control. Megiddo has yielded some of the richest archaeological layers in Israel. Ivory inlays, found in palatial ruins, decorated with Egyptian and Mesopotamian motifs. Stamped jar handles, bearing administrative seals. Weighing stones, used for tax assessment. Inscribed ostraca, clay fragments bearing names, lists, and accounts. Imported Phoenician ceramics. A circular altar, possibly predating Israelite control, reused during Solomon's renovations. These finds show a cosmopolitan, bureaucratic, and militarized urban center, deeply connected to the wider ancient world. Solomon's reach extended through Megiddo, not just over it. A whispered scene, a night in the governor's house. Let us slow the moment. A governor stands at a window, overlooking the stables. Below, horses shift in their sleep. Their breath rises in mist. Beyond the city, torches flicker along the road. He reads a message on a wax-sealed scroll. A caravan is due tomorrow, laden with tin, linen, and trained dogs from Aram. He sighs. There's tension in the north. Arameans grow bold. His soldiers are stretched thin, and Solomon's taxes grow heavier. He folds the scroll. He does not complain, but he does not smile, either. The cost of military readiness. To maintain a city like Megiddo required constant labor, skilled oversight, flow of goods, coin, and manpower. Yet not all costs were visible. Families displaced by forced labor. Villages taxed beyond comfort. Farms drafted into grain quotas to feed horses. The kingdom's glory, especially its military strength, was felt most in the villages, not the court. And while Solomon reigned from Jerusalem, the pressure pulsed in cities like Megiddo, echoes of past battles. Long before Solomon, Megiddo had been a battlefield. Thutmose III, pharaoh of Egypt, fought the Battle of Megiddo circa 1457 BCE, one of the first recorded battles in history. Later, Tiglath-Pileser III of Assyria would storm the city. And in 609 BCE, King Josiah of Judah would be slain here by Pharaoh Necho. Megiddo became synonymous with war. Even the Book of Revelation names it as the site of final conflict. Armageddon, Har Megiddo, the Mount of Megiddo. Solomon built here for peace. But the land had other memories. And stones, unlike men, do not forget. A quiet cracking of trust. Megiddo's people were not rebels. They were soldiers, craftsmen, scribes, farmers. But they were tired. Of quotas. Of inspection. Of walls that closed as tightly as they protected. A boy walks along the wall at dusk. He looks west, toward the sea. He does not know Jerusalem. He only knows the gate, and the rules, and the ache in his father's back. He wonders if being Israelite means anything here, or if they are simply subjects beneath a name. The city at night. Megiddo does not sleep. Even in darkness, movement continues. Guards change shifts. Horses are watered. A merchant lights a lamp to count his coin. A courier gallops in from the south, dust on his beard, urgency in his eyes. Somewhere in the palace, a map is unrolled. Red dots mark trouble. A finger traces the road to Damascus, then to Tyre, then to Jerusalem. The road is held, but only just, and the silence outside the gates feels heavier than usual. The stone knows. At dawn, the first merchant opens his stall. A jug of oil tips. A guard chuckles. The city begins again. But beneath the plaza, in a layer untouched for millennia, a pottery shard sits buried in earth, scratched with the name of a woman who once sold flax. She never met Solomon, never saw Jerusalem, but her hands helped build the wall. And is the stone's memory. Hazor was never humble. Even in ruin, it stood with its back straight. A city of broad courtyards, stone palaces, and thick northern pride. Before Solomon, before David, before the tribes of Israel whispered their covenant into the wind. Hazor had already watched the sun rise over the Golan Hills for centuries. It had traded with Mari and Babylon. It had carved statues in the likeness of foreign gods. It had burned once in conquest. And now, Solomon would rebuild it. But rebuilding a city like Hazor means speaking to ghosts. Hazor is past, the head of all kingdoms. In the late Bronze Age, Hazor was among the largest Canaanite cities in the region. Occupied from the 3rd millennium BCE, peaked during the 15th to 13th centuries BCE, covered an area of 200 acres, divided into an upper city, Acropolis, and a lower city, residential/industrial zones. Mentioned in the Mari tablets, the Amarna letters as a major political center. Egyptian lists of conquests. Its king once sent tribute to Pharaoh. Its merchants traded lapis, ivory, and tin. When the Israelites entered Canaan, Hazor stood in their path. The book of Joshua tells us it was conquered and burned. And they smote all the souls that were therein, and Joshua burnt Hazor with fire. Joshua 11 verse 11. Excavations have confirmed a destruction layer, a fiery ruin sometime around 1250 to 1230 BCE. But fire was not the end. Not for Hazor. Solomon's rebuild, the royal signature. And Solomon built Hazor. 1 Kings 9 verse 15. A simple phrase. A massive project. The upper city was reinforced with a six-chambered gate, matching Gezer and Megiddo. Casemate walls, typical of Israelite fortification design. Public buildings and administrative courtyards. An open plaza at the top of the city, used for gatherings and trials. Solomon's architects did not erase the past. They built over it. The stones of Canaanite palaces became foundation blocks. Old altars were buried beneath paved walkways. And on top, a new order walked in sandals. Layers in the earth, the archaeology of memory. Excavations at Hazor, led by Yigal Yadin and others, have revealed destruction layer from the late Bronze Age, burned Canaanite city. Iron Age reconstruction, dated to the 10th century BCE. Monumental ashlar structures from Solomonic planning. Imported Phoenician goods, including carved ivories and ceremonial items. Cultic rooms with standing stones and basin altars. Underground water systems begun in the Solomonic period and completed later. These finds confirm Hazor's rebirth as a northern administrative capital under Solomon. But they also reveal cultural complexity. Not all Hazorites were Israelites. This was a city layered with memory. Some of it, not easily forgotten. A walk through the city. Let us walk now. We enter through the six-chambered gate, stepping onto worn basalt stones. To the left, a guard nods. He's from the hill country, eyes sharp, young. To the right, a merchant argues over copper weights. His accent is foreign, Sidonian, perhaps. We pass through a courtyard lined with olive presses, storage jars sealed with wax, soldiers playing knucklebone dice. At the plaza, a trial is being held. Two women argue over a vineyard. A scribe sits beneath an awning, scratching ink onto papyrus. The judge listens quietly. He doesn't quote Solomon, but he lives in his shadow. The citadel of the past. On the Acropolis stands a ruin, an old Canaanite palace, blackened and hollow. Solomon did not tear it down. He built beside it. Some say it was to save time. Others say, even Solomon respected what stood before him. But the people still looked at it with unease. Children dared each other to touch its walls at night. Priests refused to sacrifice near it. Old women said the ground beneath still whispered names no one spoke. Some stones do not forget, and some ruins do not rest. Border tension and strategic silence. Hazor was not just symbolic. It was strategic. To the north and northeast lay the rising kingdom of Aram Damascus. Trade routes to Mesopotamia. Potential threats from highland tribes and mercenary bands. Solomon's control here was as much military as it was political. The city housed garrisons, supply depots, messenger stations with trained riders. But whispers rose of raids on caravans, disappearances in the woods, arrows found where no army should be. Solomon's scribes reported stability, but the guards on Hazor's walls slept lightly. A soldier's whisper. A man in his 40s sharpens his blade by lamplight. He served here for 9 years. He writes no letters. He sings no songs. He walks the upper wall at dawn, speaks to no one but his shadow. He knows that if the king falls, it will be from the edge. And he watches the hills, where light fades too fast. One night, he says to the captain, "This city was burned once. Not by swords, by silence." The captain nods. No answer needed. sacred sites, and old gods. Despite Solomon's religious reforms, Hazor reveals cultic diversity. Excavations found standing stones, masbot, ceremonial altars with animal bones, incense vessels with foreign markings, symbols associated with Canaanite and Phoenician deities. Solomon's scribes recorded temple worship in Jerusalem. But in Hazor, the sacred took different shapes. Faith was local, inherited, hard to uproot. The temple may be in the south, but the soul of worship still wandered the northern hills. At the edge of night, Hazor sleeps now. The horses rest in shadowed stalls. A merchant snores beside his coins. A dog circles once, then curls beside the gate. And beneath the Acropolis, in a layer 3,000 years old, a bead lies in dust, turquoise, carved with a symbol long lost. It belonged to someone who never knew Solomon, but who lived in his city, paid his taxes, heard his name only when orders came. The king built Hazor, but Hazor belonged to time. Most of Solomon's cities stood in stone, but one swayed with the waves. Ezion-Geber was not like Jerusalem. It did not kneel to the temple. It bowed to the tides. And here, Solomon reached beyond his hills, beyond his tribes, beyond even his name. He built ships, sent them to Tarshish, and dreamed of distant gold, not mined, but carried on waves. Where was Ezion-Geber? And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is beside Elath, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. 1 Kings 9 verse 26. Ezion-Geber likely sat near modern-day Eilat or Tel El-Khalife, close to the Gulf of Aqaba, Red Sea. This port lay in Edomite territory, indicating that Solomon either held sway over Edom at the time, or had negotiated coastal access through diplomacy or marriage. Archaeological surveys of Tel El-Khalife reveal fortifications, massive copper smelting facilities, large storehouses, ashlar masonry consistent with royal administration, trade artifacts from Egypt, Arabia, and even distant India. This was no mere fishing village. It was a royal industrial and maritime center. The ships of Tarshish. The king had at sea a navy of Tarshish with the navy of Hiram. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. 1 Kings 10 verse 22. The phrase ships of Tarshish can mean vessels capable of long-distance, open sea voyages, or ships destined for the actual location of Tarshish, whose identity is debated. Some say Tartessos in Spain, others suggest a southern Arabian or Indian port. Either way, the cargoes were exotic. Gold and silver, likely from Nubia or southern Arabia. Ivory, from African trade. Apes and peacocks, pointing to Indian Ocean commerce. Solomon partnered with Hiram of Tyre, whose Phoenician sailors manned the fleet, experts in long-distance navigation. These voyages, once every 3 years, expanded Israel's horizon, and the goods they returned with widened the soul of the kingdom. Copper, the metal that fueled the sea. The Timnah Valley, just 20 to 30 kilometers north of Ezion-Geber, was a major copper mining site. Here, the air was dry, the cliffs red, and the labor brutal. Archaeological evidence shows extensive copper smelting furnaces, piles of slag from or refinement, tunnels and shafts dug deep into the rock, Egyptian inscriptions and Midianite altars, indicating long-standing mining traditions. In the 10th century BCE, corresponding to Solomon's reign, there was a spike in copper production. Mining camps expanded. New technological advances, such as bellows and chimney draft systems, were employed. Copper was critical. A day in Ezion-Geber. Let us walk now. The sun rises blood orange over the Red Sea. The dock comes alive. Sailors shout in Phoenician and Hebrew. Porters roll heavy barrels of copper and salted fish. A merchant from Sheba brings myrrh in carved alabaster. A scribe stands under an awning, listing inventory on a clay tablet. Beyond the harbor, black smoke curls from smelting pits. Camels arrive from the desert. Bronze tools clatter in baskets beside obsidian knives. And at the edge of the dock, a ship creaks, bound for Ophir, bound for Tarshish, bound for something beyond. The whisper of the sea. Not everyone loved the sea. A Judean priest, sent south by royal order, stares at the harbor. The sea is chaos. There are no borders, only water. The port captain laughs. Chaos pays well. They both smile, but only one of them means it. For Solomon, the sea was opportunity, but for many, it was still foreign, unclean, unknowable. The kingdom was expanding, but the soul was uncertain. Trade routes and global webs. Easy and Geber connected Solomon's Israel to an ancient trade web. Egyptian linen and gold from the Nile. Arabian incense from Sheba and Dedan. Nubian ivory and skins from the south. Indian spices and exotic animals via sea. Goods came by caravan and ship, stored in vast warehouses and taxed under royal watch. Some would journey north to Jerusalem. Others stayed, enriching the southern territories. This trade funded military expansion, supplied luxury for the palace, increased diplomatic leverage with foreign courts. The kingdom breathed inland, but it pulsed from Easy and Geber, sailors and stories. A Phoenician sailor sits at the fire. He has seen Tarshish, or says he has. He speaks of a city of white stone, rivers wide as oceans, gold traded like barley. The younger crew gather to listen. They ask about monsters, about whirlpools, about the edge of the world. He only smiles. You think Solomon is wise? The sea is wiser still, and the waves lap gently at the hulls behind him, as if in agreement. At the edge of land, night in Easy and Geber is quiet. The copper has cooled. The sails are tied. In the smelter's quarter, a child sleeps beside a broken mold. In the merchant's lodge, incense burns low. And in a warehouse, a small ivory figurine rests, carved in a style not known in Canaan. It came from across the sea. It has no name, but it waits, like the city, like the kingdom, like the king, who dared to dream in ships. Kingdoms do not run on dreams, nor on prayers, nor even on wisdom alone. They run on grain and stone and blood. Solomon was called wise, but wisdom did not fill the treasuries. Wisdom did not build the temple. Wisdom did not carve roads through rock. People did, and in the quiet villages, beyond the cedar halls and ivory thrones, that weight was known. The 12 districts dividing the kingdom, and Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel, which provided victuals for the king and his household. Each man his month in a year made provision. Solomon reorganized the nation into 12 administrative districts, each tasked with supplying the royal court for 1 month per year, providing grain, oil, meat, wine, and labor, coordinating infrastructure, levies, and communication. Notably, the boundaries did not follow tribal lines, deliberately blurring old identities. This made governance more efficient, but undermined traditional loyalties. Each district was overseen by a royal officer. These men were appointed from Solomon's inner circle, loyal to the crown, often married into royal or allied families. This was centralized administration, advanced, calculated, and burdensome. Corvée labor, forced construction. The word is not shouted, but it echoes in every stone. Mas, Hebrew for forced labor or levy. Solomon revived and expanded the practice of corvée labor, originally introduced by earlier monarchs. Men were drafted to quarry stone, build palaces and roads, work copper mines and shipyards, serve in military construction projects. According to 1 Kings 5 verses 13 to 14, he conscripted 30,000 men from Israel. 10,000 served per month in Lebanon, rotating. Supervised by Adoniram, Solomon's overseer of labor. In addition to tens of thousands more non-Israelite laborers from conquered peoples. This was not slavery in the modern sense. But it was not freedom. For the peasant, it meant weeks away from farm and family, risk of injury, disease, or death, return to find fields overgrown, debts mounting, and all in service of a glory they rarely saw. Royal revenue and international tribute. Solomon's wealth came not only from internal labor, but also from foreign tribute and taxation of trade routes. Sources included tariffs on caravans through Megiddo, Hazor, and Gezer, toll roads between Egypt and Mesopotamia, allied gifts from kings such as Hiram of Tyre and the Queen of Sheba, control of copper and incense routes from Eziongeber and Edom, export taxes on grain, wine, oil, linen. This created a flow of wealth into Jerusalem, funding palace expansion, the temple's adornment, foreign embassies, military armament, especially cavalry and chariots. But for the villagers, this wealth remained distant, a rumor gilded in burden. A day in the tax office. Imagine, a scribe sits in a modest but well-guarded booth beside a road near Jezreel. A cart arrives with 3 amphorae of olive oil. The driver presents a writ, marked with his district seal. The scribe compares signatures, dips his stylus in ink, records the weight and source. A copper ring is pressed into wax. The driver says nothing. He bows, turns back to his mule. He has 2 more stops before dark. The scribe yawns. There are still 17 carts to record before dusk. A small empire, running on parchment, quiet resentments. Few resisted openly, but the weight was spoken of in mutters, songs, silences. Jerusalem eats the sun. The king's gold is mined in our ribs. A wise man does not burn his plow for incense. Old tribal elders frowned at the new district lines. Young men returned thin from the quarries. Women learned to sow fields alone while their husbands labored in Megiddo. Even as Solomon's fame grew, the strain widened. Religious justification. Solomon did not ignore the burden, but he justified it. The temple was the house of the Lord. The people's sacrifice would bring divine favor. The prosperity of the court was the prosperity of the nation. Priests preached this. Scrolls repeated it. Scribes etched it into bronze. But among the poor, this faith sometimes cracked. A man may love God, and yet wonder if God loves him back while he digs the king's cistern. Archaeological evidence of administration. Excavations have found weight measures standardized across sites to enforce fair trade/tax. LMLK jar handles belonging to the king, used for taxation and storage. Ostraca inscribed pottery shards, listing quotas, deliveries, and names. Seal impressions of royal officials on scrolls and amphorae. Administrative buildings and sites like Ramat Rahel and Lachish. The system was real, sophisticated, and far-reaching. Every stone in the temple, every cedar beam, had a name behind it, and often a weary one. The shadow beneath the gold. As night falls on a district village, a man returns from his rotation in Lebanon. He kneels beside his sleeping child. His hands are blistered. His mind is far away, still moving cedar logs with sweat and song. He says nothing. In Jerusalem, Solomon dines with dignitaries. A harp plays softly. But in the village, silence tells a different story. The kingdom gleams, but it carries a bruise. The Book of Kings counts Solomon's wives by the hundred, but he was not the first king to marry for power, nor the last to confuse possession with peace. In every kingdom, there are 2 stories, one written in stone and war, and the other whispered in courtyards. This is the latter, the royal wives, numbers and names. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. 1 Kings 11 verse 3. The biblical account presents Solomon's wives not only in terms of quantity, but political consequence. These women were foreign princesses sent as part of treaties, local noblewomen tied to tribal alliances, religious outsiders introducing new rites, symbols of diplomacy embodying peace between nations. Among the most prominent, The daughter of Pharaoh from Egypt, likely a key alliance to avoid war with the southern empire. Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, representing trade, treaties, and vassal arrangements. These marriages strengthened Solomon's geopolitical web, but brought with them gods, customs, and tensions. The palace became a theological melting pot, and not everyone approved. Religion and ritual, foreign altars. Then did Solomon build an high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. 1 Kings 11 verse 7. Historical interpretation suggests Solomon allowed foreign wives to worship their gods. He may have constructed shrines near Jerusalem or in private estates. These acts were later condemned as idolatry and syncretism. But it's possible these shrines were part of political compromise, a way to honor the traditions of powerful wives without fully embracing them. Archaeological evidence near Jerusalem includes cultic installations outside the main temple area, female figurines associated with Ishura, a goddess linked to fertility, incense altars, and standing stones in domestic quarters. Faith, in Solomon's kingdom, was not one thread. It was a tapestry, woven with the hands of women. Daily life in the royal harem. The royal harem was not merely for pleasure. It was an institution, organized, hierarchical, and heavily guarded. It included senior wives with political influence, concubines, often from lower-ranked houses, attendants, scribes, and female officials, children, tutors, and servants. Rooms were arranged around courtyards with gardens, fountains, and shaded benches. Activities may have included embroidery and textile weaving, music and poetry, religious rituals, quiet conversation, gossip, and political insight. While some women were isolated, others listened, advised, and shaped policy indirectly. And in the silence of the palace walls, a clever woman could move the heart of a king. No monument defined Solomon more than the temple. It was his crown, his offering, his claim to eternity. Not a throne, but a place for God to dwell. But even God's house, they say, must be built with calloused hands. And beneath the gold, there was dust. Biblical account, a house for the name. And Solomon began to build the house of the Lord. Construction began in the 4th year of Solomon's reign and lasted 7 years. The temple was located on Mount Moriah, Jerusalem, built according to divine instructions as passed from David, aligned east-west toward the rising sun. Dimensions: 60 cubits long, 90 feet, 20 cubits wide, 30 feet, 30 cubits high, 45 feet, surrounded by courtyards, storerooms, and side chambers. The inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, was a perfect cube overlaid with pure gold. It held the Ark of the Covenant, the tablets of Moses. No voice echoed there. It was not made for speech, only for presence. Cedar, gold, and Phoenician craftsmanship. The temple's materials came from afar. Cedar and cypress wood from Lebanon. Gold and silver imported via Tyre and Eziongeber. Bronze cast in the Jordan plain. Stone quarried and dressed at the source, so that no hammer or chisel was heard on the sacred site. Solomon employed Hiram of Tyre, a master artisan, tens of thousands of laborers, porters, and stonemasons. Key architectural features: carved cherubim, palm trees, and pomegranates. 2 massive bronze pillars, Jachin and Boaz at the entrance. A sea of cast bronze, resting on 12 oxen. 10 golden lampstands, 10 tables of showbread, and intricately embroidered curtains. It was not a fortress. It was a cosmos in miniature, heaven built into stone. Archaeological echoes. While the temple itself was destroyed, first in 586 BCE by the Babylonians, archaeological evidence suggests Phoenician-style ashlar masonry beneath the Temple Mount retaining walls. Temple models and iconography matching biblical descriptions found at Tel Arad, Khirbet Kiafa, and Lachish. Nearby installations resembling altar platforms, incense altars, and cultic basins. Though the exact structure cannot be excavated due to the sacredness of the modern site, surrounding finds align with the layout of other Iron Age temples in the region. The scale and symbolism of sacred architecture tied to divine kingship. In short, the temple's memory remains, not in bricks, but in reverence, ritual, and sacrifice. The temple was not a museum. It was alive. Daily practices included morning and evening burnt offerings, incense burned on the golden altar, lampstands trimmed and relit, bread of the presence refreshed each Sabbath. Festivals drew pilgrims from across the land. Passover, Feast of Weeks, Feast of Tabernacles. Pilgrims sang psalms of ascent as they climbed the roads to Zion. The priesthood, descended from Aaron, performed the rites. Only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies, once per year, on Yom Kippur. And when he did, he spoke for a people, and hoped he would emerge alive. The dedication, fire from heaven. The glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. At the temple's dedication, Solomon stood before the altar, arms raised. He offered a long prayer, asking for forgiveness, justice, and divine presence. Sacrifices were made in the tens of thousands. A cloud filled the inner sanctuary, the Shekinah, or divine glory. This event symbolized a shift from tent-dwelling Yahweh, tabernacle, to settled monarchy, power centralized in Jerusalem, in Solomon, in stone. For the first time, God had an address, and the kingdom shook with awe. A stonecutter's prayer. His hands bled for weeks. He had never seen the temples inside. He was not allowed. But he carved the lions that flanked the steps. He saw their mouths open wide as his own ribs ached from the effort. On the day of dedication, he stood at the edge of the crowd, his children beside him, his knees dusty. When the trumpet sounded and the fire rose, he wept. He had built it, but it would never carry his name, only his prayer, women, and worship. While the priesthood was male, women still participated in festival pilgrimages, brought offerings for purification, childbirth, or thanksgiving, prayed and wept at the temple courts, like Hannah, mother of Samuel, may have served in musical or weaving roles based on later references in Chronicles. For many women, the temple was a place of longing, a space where divine attention felt near, a refuge during childlessness, grief, or injustice. It was not their building, but often it was their hope. The temple at night. At night, the flames still burned in the inner lampstands. A low golden glow seeped through the cracks in the stone. Outside, a boy stood beside his father. They had traveled 3 days to see it. He asked, "Is God in there?" The father was silent, then said, "He is everywhere. But here, we remember." And the boy nodded. For sometimes, even remembering is holy. She came from the edge of the world, not just to see Solomon, but to weigh him, to learn if wisdom was real, or just another crown. Biblical account, the riddle-bearing queen. And when the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to prove him with hard questions. 1 Kings 10 verse 1. Sheba was more than curious. She was testing him. She arrived with a very great train of servants, camels bearing spices, gold, and precious stones, riddles and questions, meant to probe Solomon's mind and soul. Solomon answered all, and she was left breathless. She said, "Thy wisdom and prosperity exceed the fame which I heard." 1 Kings 10 verse 7. And she returned to her land. But her presence never left his. Where was Sheba? Scholars place Sheba in the South Arabian kingdom of Saba, in present-day Yemen, or possibly stretching into parts of modern Ethiopia and Eritrea. The kingdom was a hub of spice trade, especially frankincense and myrrh. Exceptionally wealthy, due to control of caravan routes. Architecturally advanced, with temples, dams, and irrigation systems. Likely matrilineal or at least with high-ranking royal women. Archaeological evidence includes the Maram Bilqis, Temple of the Moon God Al-Makka, in Yemen, Sabaean inscriptions referencing queens and merchants, monumental ruins in Marib, the ancient capital. In Ethiopia, traditions identify her as Makeda, Queen of Aksum, whether Yemeni or Ethiopian. She came from a land where wealth flowed with incense and power smelled of spice. The caravan journey. Imagine the journey. Hundreds of camels, guarded by archers and servants, bearing silk, ivory, cinnamon, and gold, crossing the Arabian desert, navigating wells and rock shrines. Weeks of sand, nights under stars, riddles whispered by firelight, and one name carried north, Solomon. Her coming was not for spectacle. It was a statement. I have heard of you. Now I will see. Riddles and dialogue. Though the biblical account does not list them, later traditions and folklore provide examples of the queen's riddles. From Jewish Midrash. What is the thing that was not born but was created? Answer: heaven and earth. 7 exit, 9 enter, 2 pour, and 1 drinks. Answer: eating, hands, orifices, and the mouth. A house with 10 doors. When it is shut, it is open. When it is open, it is shut. Answer: the eye. These riddles served a purpose. To test his knowledge, yes, but also to challenge his humility, spiritual depth, and cultural understanding. Wisdom, she believed, was not merely logic. It was balance and the ability to see the soul beneath the word. And in that, she found him worthy. Gifts of the South. She gave the king 120 talents of gold, and of spices very great store, and precious stones. 1 Kings 10 verse 10. This was not mere tribute. It was a trade agreement, a diplomatic exchange of equals. Spices, especially frankincense and myrrh, were worth more than gold. Used in temple rites, burned in sacred rituals, essential to Egyptian embalming and elite perfumery. Sheba controlled the incense route from southern Arabia up through Edom and Judah. This visit may have sealed Solomon's access to these vital luxuries. In return, he gave her all she desired. Some say that included a child. The Ethiopian tradition. In the Kabra Nagast, a 14th century Ethiopian chronicle, the Queen of Sheba is called Makeda. She travels to Jerusalem, is impressed by Solomon's wisdom. He tricks her into sleeping with him. She bears a son, Menelik I, who becomes the first emperor of Ethiopia. Menelik later returns to Jerusalem and takes the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia. While not found in the Hebrew Bible, this tradition founded the Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia, became a cornerstone of Ethiopian identity and theology, linked African kingship directly to biblical Israel. Thus, from a brief visit, a dynasty was born, the sacred feminine. Beyond politics and lineage, the Queen of Sheba represents the seeker, the outsider who dares question, the sacred feminine engaging the sacred masculine, not in submission, but in dialogue. She is often compared to the woman wisdom in Proverbs, the Song of Songs lover, dark, mysterious, desired, a forerunner of cross-cultural reverence. In some traditions, she is even seen as a priestess, a sage, or a prophetess. She did not merely visit. She transformed the narrative. A whispered conversation. One night, beneath hanging lamps, they sit in silence. She asks, "Is your wisdom a gift or a wound?" He replies, "Both, but I try to make it a garden." She touches a fig. She says nothing more. Later, when she departs, he watches her caravan fade into the sun, and for a long time, he speaks less, not because he lacks words, but because he remembers hers. The last camel. At night, a boy in Jerusalem sees the dust trail on the horizon. He asks, "Was that a queen?" His father nods. Yes, but not just a queen. She brought questions, and the courage to ask them. The boy doesn't fully understand, but he feels something change. And years later, When he sees the smoke rise from the incense altar, he remembers her. The temple stood. The throne gleamed. Gold still arrived at the ports of Ezion-Geber. And yet, Solomon, once the builder of unity, began to hear the voices below the surface. They were not loud, but they were growing. Solomon's later years. Solomon ruled for 40 years, a reign defined by wisdom, wealth, and expansion. But in his final decade, his policies of forced labor and taxation stirred discontent. His foreign marriages and religious tolerance drew condemnation from traditionalists. His once sharp mind turned more isolated, more inward. He became distant from the people, surrounded by officials and foreign envoys, burdened by the machine of monarchy he had built. Even a wise man can grow tired, and wisdom, if not refreshed, becomes weariness. Prophetic warnings. The Lord was angry with Solomon, because his heart was turned from the Lord. Wherefore the Lord said, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee. 1 Kings 11 verses 9 to 11. The Bible tells of divine displeasure, that Solomon turned to foreign gods, that he built altars for Chemosh, Molech, and Ashtoreth, that he tolerated idolatry in Jerusalem. Prophets began to speak again, but not in celebration, in warning. Their voices, like old winds, said, The king is not the kingdom. The covenant is not gold. Peace without righteousness will crack like clay. And some listened, quietly. The rise of adversaries. Solomon's later reign saw the emergence of enemies, both foreign and domestic. Among them, Hadad the Edomite, a royal of Edom who fled as a boy during David's wars and returned during Solomon's rule to stir resistance. Rezin of Damascus, a Syrian rebel who gathered men and declared himself king in Aram, threatening Israel's northern border. Jeroboam, son of Nebat, a talented official placed over the labor of the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh. He witnessed the burden of the people. A prophet named Ahijah met him and tore a cloak into 12 pieces, giving Jeroboam 10, symbolizing a future split in the kingdom. Jeroboam fled to Egypt, but the seed of division had been planted, and Solomon felt the roots shift beneath his throne. The burden of gold. Solomon's economy, once praised, became heavy. The palace consumed vast resources. Trade wealth stayed in the capital, not the countryside. Forced labor continued. The tribal identity system weakened. The 12 districts had replaced the tribal map. Efficient, yes, but alienating. And those in the north, the hill tribes of Ephraim, Manasseh, Naphtali, began to say, What portion have we in Judah? To your tents, O Israel. The murmur grew. The temple stood as glory. But the nation began to grumble. Solomon's reflection, a fictional glimpse. He sits alone in his cedar hall. A harp leans untouched. Scrolls lie unrolled beside him. He whispers, I built your house, Lord, but did I forget your voice? He remembers the day he judged between two mothers, the queen who brought riddles, the quiet stonecutter who bowed without words. He touches the cold gold arm of his throne and realizes he is not warm. The wisdom literature, a turn toward mourning. Solomon is traditionally credited with Ecclesiastes, a book of poetic despair and philosophical searching. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Ecclesiastes 1 verse 2. This tone, so different from the triumph of Proverbs, reflects an old man looking back, a sense that power and wealth do not satisfy, a reaching for meaning in mortality. He writes, To everything there is a season, a time to be born and a time to die. Perhaps these words were penned, not in triumph, but in regret, preparing the next king. Solomon named his son Rehoboam as successor. But Rehoboam had little political experience, was raised in the court, not the fields, did not understand the pain of the provinces. Solomon tried to pass on protocol, sacred texts, maps, alliances, tribute paths, but he could not pass on wisdom. That must be earned, not given. And some things he never told him. The kingdom after Solomon. Solomon died. He was buried in the city of David, his ancestors' resting place. Shortly after, Rehoboam increased the tax burden. The northern tribes revolted. 10 tribes broke away to form the kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam. Jerusalem remained capital of Judah. 2 tribes, 2 temples, 2 destinies. The kingdom split. The unity Solomon built dissolved in 1 generation. And still, the temple stood. But the voice of unity no longer echoed through its halls. One last night, a young scribe sits beside the king's empty chair. He writes by oil lamp light. He records names, laws, poems. Then he adds something in the margin. He was wise, but wisdom is a seed, and not every hand that plants it lives to see the tree. Outside, dawn rises over Jerusalem, and in the city, the builders stir once more. The palace rose from stone, but the kingdom's future rode on water. Solomon, son of David, was not just a king of land. He became a king of currents, caravans, and coasts. The ports of Easy and Geber. The Bible tells us, King Solomon made a navy of ships in Easy and Geber, beside Aloth, on the shore of the Red Sea. 1 Kings 9 verse 26. Easy and Geber, likely located near modern-day Elad, Israel, or Aqaba, Jordan, was a strategic harbor at the northern tip of the Red Sea, a launch point for fleets heading south toward Ophir, Sheba, and beyond. The gateway for contact with the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, and possibly India. Archaeological findings from Tel El Khalifa, often identified with Easy and Geber, suggest a fortified port town, evidence of smelting furnaces indicating metalworking, remains of warehouses and storage facilities. Though direct evidence of the Solomonic Navy remains debated, the importance of this port is not. It was Solomon's eye to the sea, and the wind that left here carried more than just goods. The role of the Phoenicians. Solomon had no ancestral maritime tradition, but his ally, King Hiram of Tyre, ruled a Phoenician seafaring culture that had sailed for centuries. Phoenicians were master shipbuilders, known for their cedar hulls and advanced navigation. Established trading colonies across the Mediterranean, from Cyprus to Carthage. Traded in purple dye, glass, metals, ivory, and cedar. Had access to maritime knowledge far beyond Judah. Solomon formed a joint navy with Hiram. The ships manned by Phoenician sailors and captains with superior nautical skill. Israelite workers learning the trade. Merchants and scribes tracking cargo and tribute. From this alliance, the ships of Tarshish and fleets to Ophir were born. And Jerusalem, far from the coast, became the mind of an oceanic machine. Trade goods and global networks. The fleets returned with riches described in 1 Kings 10. Gold, silver, ivory, apes, peacocks, almug wood, precious stones. Each item tells a story. Apes and peacocks likely came from India or East Africa. Ivory suggests contact with Africa, possibly via the Horn of Africa or Nubia. Almug wood, possibly sandalwood, indicates trade routes extending as far as southern India. This network suggests ships crossed Arabian coastal ports, stopping at Sheba, continued around the Horn of Africa, possibly reached the western Indian coast, known for timber, spices, and exotic animals. Solomon's kingdom consumed the world, not through war, but through commerce, the mysterious land of Ophir. And they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold. 1 Kings 9 verse 28. Ophir remains one of the great mysteries of ancient geography. Theories place it in southern Arabia, Yemen/Oman, East Africa, Somalia or Mozambique, India, particularly the west coast, Kerala, or even multiple ports under a single poetic name. What is known? Ophir was a source of immense wealth. Its gold was renowned for purity and volume. It symbolized Solomon's reach into the unknown. Whether myth or reality, Ophir became a word for dreams gilded in salt air. and for the men who sailed to find it. It was not just a place. It was a test. Diplomatic exchanges and sea letters. Alongside goods, the fleets carried envoys and letters, tribute agreements, foreign artisans and scribes. Solomon's diplomatic web spanned Tyre through King Hiram, Egypt through royal marriage, Sheba through the queen's visit, Edom and Midian controlling inland trade routes, possibly connections to India or Mesopotamia via intermediaries. Letters may have been written in Aramaic, the diplomatic lingua franca, Hebrew for internal use, Phoenician in Tyrian ports. These documents, now lost, were the invisible cargo of empire, the words that held together wood, gold, and peace. A sailor's story, a human glimpse. He left from Ezion-Geber when the wind was right. The ship smelled of tar, sweat, and cedar. He had never seen a peacock, but one stood caged beside the cargo of ivory tusks, blinking slowly. Months passed. Storms came near Sheba. A port there gave them water, dates, and songs he did not understand. In India, he saw colors that hurt his eyes. Saffron, indigo, gold stitched into silk. He returned a year later. A little richer, a little quieter. At night, he still dreams of red sand and singing women. He never learned the names of the places, only how they smelled. Solomon's view. From his palace, Solomon read lists of cargo by lamplight. He never saw the waves, but he understood how far his name now reached, how his policies fed not just his kingdom, but his ego, that with every ship, his kingdom grew heavier. The gold was piled in vaults. The spices perfumed his halls, and the rumors of Solomon spread beyond his control. He was now not only a king, but a legend. And legends, he knew, often drown in their own shadow. A boy at the harbor. A boy stands barefoot on the stones of Ezion-Geber. He sees sails on the horizon, red, blue, gold. He smells cinnamon before he sees the cargo. He hears the call of a sailor. From Ophir. And he smiles. He doesn't know what Ophir means. But he knows this. The world is wide. And the king he has never met somehow made it smaller. The palace rose from stone. But the kingdom's future rode on water. Solomon, son of David, was not just a king of land. He became a king of currents, caravans, and coasts. The ports of Ezion-Geber. The Bible tells us, King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, beside Aloth, on the shore of the Red Sea. 1 Kings 9 verse 26. Ezion-Geber, likely located near modern-day Elat, Israel, or Aqaba, Jordan, was a strategic harbor at the northern tip of the Red Sea, a launch point for fleets heading south toward Ophir, Sheba, and beyond. The gateway for contact with the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, and possibly India. Archaeological findings from Tel el-Khalifa, often identified with Ezion-Geber, suggest a fortified port town, evidence of smelting furnaces indicating metalworking, remains of warehouses and storage facilities. Though direct evidence of the Solomonic navy remains debated, the importance of this port is not. It was Solomon's eye to the sea, and the wind that left here carried more than just goods. The role of the Phoenicians. Solomon had no ancestral maritime tradition, but his ally, King Hiram of Tyre, ruled a Phoenician seafaring culture that had sailed for centuries. Phoenicians were master shipbuilders, known for their cedar hulls and advanced navigation. Established trading colonies across the Mediterranean, from Cyprus to Carthage. Traded in purple dye, glass, metals, ivory, and cedar. Had access to maritime knowledge far beyond Judah. Solomon formed a joint navy with Hiram. The ships manned by Phoenician sailors and captains with superior nautical skill. Israelite workers learning the trade. Merchants and scribes tracking cargo and tribute. From this alliance, the ships of Tarshish and fleets to Ophir were born. And Jerusalem, far from the coast, became the mind of an oceanic machine. trade goods, and global networks. The fleets returned with riches described in 1 Kings 10. Gold, silver, ivory, apes, peacocks, almug wood, precious stones. Each item tells a story. Apes and peacocks likely came from India or East Africa. Ivory suggests contact with Africa, possibly via the Horn of Africa or Nubia. Almug wood, possibly sandalwood, indicates trade routes extending as far as southern India. This network suggests ships crossed Arabian coastal ports, stopping at Sheba, continued around the Horn of Africa, possibly reached the western Indian coast, known for timber, spices, and exotic animals. Solomon's kingdom consumed the world, not through war, but through commerce, the mysterious land of Ophir. And they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold. 1 Kings 9 verse 28. Ophir remains one of the great mysteries of ancient geography. Theories place it in southern Arabia, Yemen/Oman, East Africa, Somalia or Mozambique, India, particularly the west coast, Kerala, or even multiple ports under a single poetic name. What is known? Ophir was a source of immense wealth. Its gold was renowned for purity and volume. It symbolized Solomon's reach into the unknown. Whether myth or reality, Ophir became a word for dreams gilded in salt air, and for the men who sailed to find it. It was not just a place. It was a test. Diplomatic exchanges and sea letters. Alongside goods, the fleets carried envoys and letters, tribute agreements, foreign artisans and scribes. Solomon's diplomatic web spanned Tyre, through King Hiram; Egypt, through royal marriage; Sheba, through the queen's visit; Edom and Midian, controlling inland trade routes, possibly connections to India or Mesopotamia via intermediaries. Letters may have been written in Aramaic, the diplomatic lingua franca; Hebrew, for internal use; Phoenician, in Tyrian ports. These documents, now lost, were the invisible cargo of empire, the words that held together wood, gold, and peace. A sailor's story, a human glimpse. He left from Ezion-Geber when the wind was right. The ship smelled of tar, sweat, and cedar. He had never seen a peacock, but one stood caged beside the cargo of ivory tusks, blinking slowly. Months passed. Storms came near Sheba. A port there gave them water, dates, and songs he did not understand. In India, he saw colors that hurt his eyes. Saffron, indigo, gold stitched into silk. He returned a year later, a little richer, a little quieter. At night, he still dreams of red sand and singing women. He never learned the names of the places, only how they smelled. Solomon's view. From his palace, Solomon read lists of cargo by lamplight. He never saw the waves, but he understood how far his name now reached, how his policies fed not just his kingdom, but his ego, that with every ship, his kingdom grew heavier. The gold was piled in vaults. The spices perfumed his halls, and the rumors of Solomon spread beyond his control. He was now not only a king, but a legend. And legends, he knew, often drown in their own shadow. A boy at the harbor. A boy stands barefoot on the stones of Ezion-Geber. He sees sails on the horizon, red, blue, gold. He smells cinnamon before he sees the cargo. He hears the call of a sailor. From Ophir. And he smiles. He doesn't know what Ophir means. But he knows this. The world is wide. And the king he has never met somehow made it smaller. The sea brought the wealth. But the land paid for it. Solomon's greatness did not float into being. It was mined, hewn, and harvested from forests that no longer grew, from hills that bled copper, and from hands that never saw a throne. The cedars of Lebanon. One of Solomon's most critical imports was cedar, especially for the construction of the temple, palace, and warships. And Hiram gave Solomon cedar trees and fir trees according to all his desire. 1 Kings 5 verse 10. The cedars of Lebanon grew tall and straight, ideal for beams and masts. held sacred significance, symbols of kingship and the divine, were native to the Lebanon and anti-Lebanon mountains, modern Lebanon and western Syria. Archaeological evidence from sites like Byblos, Tel Arqa, and Sidon confirms. Cedar was exported by Phoenicians as early as the 3rd millennium BCE. Timber was rafted down rivers or floated along coasts. Royal forest lands were carefully managed, but eventually overharvested. Solomon provided grain, oil, and wine in exchange, thousands of cores annually. But the deeper cost? The forest thinned, and the gods of the hills fell quiet. Mining operations, copper and gold. Solomon's empire depended on metal for tools, construction, and ornamentation. Small orange diamond copper. The most extensive mining region was Timnah, in the Arava Valley, southern Israel. Features: evidence of large-scale copper mining and smelting. Industrial installations like furnaces, slag heaps, and workshops. Use of charcoal from acacia trees to reach smelting temperatures. Recent research, especially by Erez Ben Yosef and the Central Timnah Valley Project, suggests activity peaked during the 10th century BCE, Solomon's era. Workers included local nomads, possibly under Israelite control. A complex labor system with possible seasonal operations. Gold. Gold likely came from Ophir, possible East African or Arabian source. Egyptian mines, via tribute or trade. Nubian territories, known for their deep shafts and washing basins. Gold wasn't just wealth. It was ritual, plating sacred spaces, temple utensils, and shields. And each ounce was carved from rock by men who never saw the temple they served. Stone quarries and labor camps. Solomon's grand projects demanded massive stone blocks, especially for the temple and palace complex. And Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders hewed them and prepared the timber and stones to build the house. 1 Kings 5 verse 18. Quarrying sites included Jerusalem's own bedrock near the Temple Mount, Mizpeh and Geba, central Judah, possibly parts of Phoenician territory. Stones were hewn off-site to reduce noise at sacred locations, transported using sledges, rollers, and oxen. Workforce included 30,000 conscripted Israelites, rotated in shifts, 10,000/month, 70,000 burden bearers, 80,000 hewers of stone, 3,300 overseers. Though the Bible describes this as corvée labor, not permanent slavery, it remained compulsory. And among the workers, a saying emerged: "We built a house for God, but no one built one for us." The system of tribute and taxation. Solomon divided his kingdom into 12 administrative districts, 1 Kings 4, each responsible for supplying the royal household for 1 month per year. This system eased pressure on Judah by spreading the cost, increased control over the northern tribes, replaced traditional tribal identities with bureaucratic zones. Tribute included grain and livestock, olive oil and wine, labor and resources. Over time, tensions rose, especially in northern regions. Grievances about inequality grew. These grievances later fueled the split under Rehoboam. Empire, it seemed, was not weightless. It pressed downward, and the people began to feel it in their bones. Bureaucracy and record-keeping. Behind every beam of cedar or talent of gold stood scribes, the unsung architects of empire. Solomon's administration relied on logbooks of incoming and outgoing goods, inventories of labor, livestock, and trade, tax records, possibly written in Hebrew or Aramaic, sealed documents using clay bully, archaeological parallels from Lachish, Samaria Ostraca, later Judean seals. Though we lack a direct Solomonic archive, the administrative system likely mirrored Egyptian granary models, Phoenician trade records. The empire was vast, but it was held together by ink, not just iron. A quarryman's thought. He dreams of the day when someone will walk the halls he carved. He will not be there, but his name, scratched into the rock behind a beam, might remain. His fingers are raw. He hasn't seen his wife in 3 weeks. But he believes, if I shape this right, God might pass by here. And for a moment, that is enough. Environmental cost and sacred tensions. The resource extraction brought wealth, but also deforestation, especially in southern Judah and parts of Edom. Soil erosion from overgrazing and timber transport. Charcoal production depleting woodlands. Depopulation of areas supplying manpower. While the temple rose, the hills grew quieter, and in the silence, some priests wondered, if creation is holy, how much can we strip from it before the covenant cracks? A boy and a broken hammer. In the copper fields of Timnah, a boy finds a shattered tool. He doesn't know whose it was, but he picks it up, imagining it once built the temple. And for a moment, he sees the golden interior, not as a visitor, but as the one who made it possible. He doesn't tell his father, but he hides the piece under his sleeping mat. Like a dream, Solomon was wise, but he was not alone. Beyond the borders of his growing kingdom, other powers watched. Older, larger, and rivaling him in silence. They saw his gold. They heard of his temple. They sent gifts and questions. For in the ancient world, to rise was to be noticed. And not all attention was praise. Egypt, the house of Pharaoh, Egypt, to the southwest, had for millennia been a colossus, builder of pyramids, conqueror of Canaan, and guardian of the Nile. By Solomon's era, 10th century BCE, Egypt was, in its third intermediate period, politically divided between Tanis, in the delta, and Thebes, in the south, controlled by a mix of Libyan dynasts and priestly power structures. Still formidable, but more diplomatic than imperial. Solomon made affinity with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter. 1 Kings 3 verse 1. This royal marriage was unprecedented in Israel's history. Egyptians rarely gave royal women to foreign kings. This suggests a strong alliance, or a strategic concession by a weaker Egypt, or a symbolic marriage between Solomon and a non-royal noblewoman, elevated to diplomatic status. She lived in Jerusalem, likely in a separate complex until Solomon completed his own palace. She brought political prestige, Egyptian craftsmen, and cultural practices, possibly influence in court rituals. Egypt, in turn, gained a buffer ally in the Levant, access to goods from Phoenicia and Arabia, a watchful friend near rising northern threats. Mesopotamia, Assyria, and Babylonia. To the northeast, between the Tigris and Euphrates, rose the empires of Assyria and Babylonia. In Solomon's time, Assyria was in a weaker phase, recovering from internal strife. Babylonia was fractured, controlled by shifting dynasties and tribal alliances. Still, both had deep trade routes reaching Syria and beyond, religious centers like Nineveh and Babylon, scholars, scribes, and astronomers who recorded the stars, and kings. There is no direct biblical mention of contact between Solomon and Assyria/Babylonia. But Phoenician intermediaries, especially from Tyre and Sidon, traded between Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean. Diplomats likely passed coded messages, often using scribes trained in Akkadian. Solomon's growing fame would have reached these lands. In Mesopotamian archives, Solomon's name doesn't appear, but trade items from the Levant do. He was, to them, a curious figure, wealthy, loud, and temporary. Hittite remnants and Anatolian powers. The Hittite Empire had collapsed 200 years before Solomon, but its shadow remained in the Neo-Hittite city-states, e.g., Carchemish, Hamath, Luwian-speaking regions of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Smaller kingdoms holding key trade routes and military crossroads. Solomon's marriages included women of the Hittites, 1 Kings 11 verse 1, likely symbolic of diplomatic ties with these remnants. Though not mighty empires, these regions controlled access to metals, especially iron and silver, mountain passes vital for land caravans, cultural cross-pollination between the Aegean and the Levant. Solomon's empire did not need to conquer them. It needed only to trade wisely and listen carefully. Arabia and the incense kingdoms. To the southeast lay the desert kingdoms. Sheba, Saba in Yemen, Dedan and Kedar in northwest Arabia. Oases like Tema and Yathrib, later Medina. These kingdoms controlled the incense and spice routes, sent camels loaded with frankincense, myrrh, and cinnamon, maintained both nomadic and urban centers, often ruled by priest kings or matrilineal queens. The Queen of Sheba, as discussed earlier, was not an isolated incident. Solomon likely maintained tributary relationships, trade posts or caravanserais, possibly desert patrols or hired guards. Arabian kingdoms watched Jerusalem, not with fear, but with merchant eyes. And Solomon, he watched their desert silence with respect. Letters, envoys, and diplomatic ritual. Diplomacy in the ancient Near East involved exchange of gifts, correspondence, often written in Akkadian or Aramaic, elaborate greeting formulas, use of envoys, who sometimes remained as resident ambassadors. Though no letters from Solomon have survived, parallels exist. The Amarna letters, 14 THC, BCE, document similar correspondence between Egypt, Canaanite kings, and Mesopotamian empires. Royal scribes handled phrases like, "To the great king, my brother, thus says the king of the land of peace. May your house be filled with life. May your gods protect your steps." Solomon's court likely mirrored these norms. Diplomacy was performance, yes, but also theology. Each king believed they ruled by divine right. To speak with another was to balance heavens. A scribe's perspective. He watches the Egyptian envoy walk into the cedar hall. He notes the fabrics, dyed linen, lotus pattern. The gift, a bronze mirror polished like water. The way he bows, too deep for strength, too shallow for submission. Later, the scribe writes, "This one smiles with teeth. His satchel holds a scroll and a knife." He says nothing aloud, but he places the envoy's name beside a drawn eye. The mark means, watch, the silent balance of power. Solomon's wisdom was not only in speech. It was in silence. He did not invade. He did not fortify far borders. He let gold, marriage, and fear do the work. Foreign kings sent tribute, not because they were weak, but because they preferred commerce to conflict. And Solomon, he built an empire not with armies, but with awareness. A child dreams of maps. In a Phoenician port, a child watches a sailor roll out a map. She sees a blue strip marked Sea of the Setting Sun, a black line to Solomon's court, tiny gold dots, Egypt, Sheba, Nineveh. She asks, "Where is the edge?" The sailor replies, "Where the names stop and the winds begin." He did not march to expand. He did not dig trenches or burn towns. Instead, Solomon built roads. He let the world come to him, on the backs of beasts, in the ledgers of scribes, and in the spice-heavy breath of merchants too tired to lie. His empire was not only seabound. It pulsed inland, across stone, sand, and hidden border posts. The southern route, incense, myrrh, and desert kings. The incense road, as it would later be called, was already ancient in Solomon's time. This route linked South Arabia, modern Yemen and Oman, with Levantine ports and Egypt, carried frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and aromatic resins, passed through key oases, Dedan, Tema, Yathrib, later Medina, and Petra. Merchants traveled with camel caravans, averaging 15 to 30 animals, in multi-month circuits, led by guides familiar with tribal lands and water sources, accompanied by scribes, translators, and guards. Solomon's influence extended through Edomite territories, especially Elat and the Araba Valley, Moab and Ammon, through treaties and intimidation. possibly Midianite and Kedarite tribes, who acted as desert intermediaries. The desert was not empty. It was a network, ancient, delicate, and fiercely negotiated. And Solomon, he knew that control of a well could be worth more than a fortress. Weighing the unseen, economics of the invisible. Spices were light, but they were worth more than metal. Why? Preservation, used to embalm bodies, treat meat, and anoint kings. Sacred ritual, essential to temple offerings. Exodus 30 describes a sacred incense blend. Perfume and luxury, for palaces, weddings, and royal seduction. Medicinal properties, myrrh for wounds, frankincense for fever. Solomon's scribes maintained conversion charts. 1 mina of frankincense equals 2 shekels of silver. Tracked the origin of goods, knowing if resin came from Sheba or Dedan affected price. Enforced weighing standards, often with bronze weights shaped like lions or ducks. Archaeological finds from Gezer and Lachish show standardized weights, marked in shekels and fractions thereof. Every toll station was also a courtroom. Disputes about weight, smell, and purity were common. And so, spice became a currency of its own, a cent that paid for stone, customs posts, and desert forts. To tax this commerce, Solomon likely maintained outposts in key passes such as Timnah in the south, En-Gedi on the Dead Sea, Arad and Tel Malhadu further inland. Storehouses where merchants could rest, pay, and reprovision. Customs scribes who collected in-kind taxes, spices, livestock, silver. Armed escorts, sometimes paid by the crown, sometimes hired privately. One papyrus, though later in date, describes a caravan stopped at a post, a dispute over underreported cinnamon, a judge ruling with reference to the scale of the house of David. Such administrative systems required trained officials, many of whom were foreign-born. Diplomatic tact, since many traders were tribal clients of desert kings. Literacy and record-keeping, especially in Aramaic and local dialects. Solomon did not send armies here. He sent mathematics, the flow of coin and credit. While Israel in Solomon's time did not mint coins, trade still used silver by weight in shekels, minas, or talents. Ring money in ingots, sometimes with stamped images. Barter and credit systems, with scribes recording debts. Phoenician and Egyptian merchants sometimes carried bead money or stone weights with royal symbols. Small bags of electrum dust or silver filings. Tablets from Ugarit, earlier period, suggest that credit systems were used in long-distance trade. Repay by the third moon, or deliver 3 lambs. In Solomon's world, trust was currency, reputation was insurance, and the only guarantee of value was a scribe's dry eyes and a seal in fresh clay. A merchant's monologue. He'd never seen Jerusalem, but he knew its hunger. He had sold myrrh to priests, ostrich eggs to nobles, a panther skin to a man who claimed it was for the king's chair. He traveled with 2 sons and 3 camels. He hid his silver under a false water pouch. And he said, I don't fear lions. Only a clerk with no ink. The Moabite plateau, pathway of power. The plateau of Moab served as a central corridor for east-west trade. Moabite kings extracted tolls and tribute from caravans. Occasionally raided Judean border towns. Were both rivals and allies to Solomon, depending on the year. Later, the Mesha Stele, 9th BCE, records Moabite rebellion against Israel. But in Solomon's time, peace prevailed. This allowed unbroken flow of grain, oil, and livestock. Marriage alliances with Moabite women. Expansion of Solomon's bureaucratic net into tribal lands. The plateau was quiet, but the hooves never stopped. The northern lanes, Damascus and beyond. Trade also flowed from the north, via Damascus, Hamath, the Bekaa Valley, linking Phoenicia to inland routes. These lanes carried metals from Anatolia, wool and textiles from the highlands. Horses, increasingly in demand by Levantine armies. Solomon's chariot cities, e.g. Megiddo, required constant import of horses and tack, skilled handlers from Aramean or Hittite stock, supply chains reaching hundreds of miles. Thus, every road became a vein, feeding the capital with life. And in return, Solomon offered golden silence. No war, just contracts. A boy who counts hoofbeats. He cannot read, but he knows how to count the camels by their sound. 2 with bells, 3 without. He runs to the scribe's station, shouting, 5 more from Sheba? The scribe nods, amused. The boy is wrong. There are 7. But the scribe doesn't correct him. He simply writes. The desert breathes. The gates hold. The wealth continues. And the boy watches the coins change hands, without ever touching one. The throne was not only gold. It was paper. It was law. It was the daily ordering of human lives, in measured grain, taxed wine, recorded bloodlines, and temple obligations. Solomon did not rule by miracle. He ruled by system. And the system had a language, spoken not aloud, but written, copied, archived. The administrative machine. Solomon divided his kingdom into 12 administrative districts, as recorded in 1 Kings 4. Each district supplied the royal household 1 month per year, was overseen by an appointed governor, many of whom were Solomon's sons-in-law, functioned as fiscal units, designed to break tribal patterns and centralize authority. This organization reduced dependency on tribal elders, helped standardize taxation and logistics, caused long-term resentment, especially in the northern tribes, leading to future rebellion under Rehoboam. It was a smart system, but it pulled the threads of kinship apart. Solomon no longer ruled a family of tribes. He ruled a bureaucratic state, offices, scribes, and seal-bearers. The court employed a vast web of officials: recorder, masker, chief archivist, scribe, sofer, responsible for drafting royal decrees, overseer of the palace, logistical control of court life, temple administrators, especially for sacrifices and festival planning, tax collectors, grain inspectors, census keepers. Each of these roles left behind archaeological echoes, including bully, clay seal impressions stamped with official names, weights and measures standardized for temple and trade, storage jars with incised letters marking district origin, later period archives, Lachish letters, Samaria ostraca, modeled on earlier systems. One bulla, found near the city of David, bears the name Azariah son of Hilkiah, scribe. It is from a later time, but it whispers, I was not the first. There were scribes before me, and they built kingdoms with words. Record-keeping and the writing culture. Writing in Solomon's time involved papyrus, imported from Egypt, used for scrolls. Ostraca, pottery shards used for short notes. Leather scrolls, especially for sacred texts. Ink made of carbon and gum, applied with a reed stylus. Cuneiform tablets, still in use in northern trade routes. Scribes were trained from childhood, memorizing formulas, phrases, contract templates, practicing calligraphy under master scribes, serving in temple schools or palace bureaus. Documents included royal decrees, trade agreements, census lists, marriage contracts, military rosters. To rule was to write, to remember. Granaries and the architecture of tax. The state's wealth was stored not in coins, but in grain. Taxation in kind involved. Wheat and barley, measured in cores and baths. Olive oil and wine, sealed in clay jars. Livestock, tallied during feasts and festivals. Labor conscription, logged by scribes and rotated by district. Granaries were massive storage complexes, some excavated at Hazor, Gezer, Megiddo, designed with ventilation shafts, plastered floors, guarded by royal officials. Tribute came daily, not yearly. Every goat, every measure of oil, became part of Solomon's breath. He inhaled through ledgers. the quietest room in the kingdom. It was not the throne room. It was a chamber with no windows, where 6 scribes sat in silence. One read, one copied, one checked, one sealed, one sorted, one wrote the same name 7 times, to be sure. In this room, the world was flattened into record. In this room, a famine was nothing but a shortage of numbers. In this room, power became permanent. Temple records and ritual administration. The temple in Jerusalem was not only a place of prayer. It was an institution, a calendar, a ledger, a fiscal organ of the kingdom. It required daily sacrifices, animals, grains, oil, priestly rotations drawn from families of Levi, festivals, Passover, tabernacles, and new ones introduced by Solomon, maintenance of utensils, garments, and altars. All of this required schedules, storage rooms, taxation from districts to support the priesthood, temple treasurers recorded, weight of incoming gold, census of firstborns, inventory of sacred vessels. Without paper, worship would fall. Knowledge as governance. Solomon's court hosted advisors, historians, astrologers and physicians, philosophers, possibly from Egypt and the East. Their wisdom was compiled into Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and possibly early editions of Chronicles, preserved orally, then later written, used to guide law and moral conduct. The king's wisdom was more than intellect. It was institutionalized observation. Every event had a meaning. Every number, a prophecy. A child follows a scribe. He is not allowed in the archive, but he follows anyway. The scribe lets him watch, lets him feel the smooth clay, lets him see the seal, a lion standing on hind legs. The child doesn't understand, but he sees the look in the scribe's eyes as the clay dries. It is the look of a man who just made a truth. And the child decides, I will not swing a sword. I will write the names of those who do.